Welcome to the Happy Fools podcast. I'm your co host, Trevor, joined by everyone's favorite Homo sapien subspecies, Carl the Cro Magnon. How are you, my friend?
Doing well, thank you, sir.
Do you mind that I called you a Homo sapien subspecies? Is that accurate? Is
I
remind me,
mean,
Cro Magnon is
well,
it?
it's a good question because we were kind of hinting at like what is a species and can you differentiate species by morphology and there's arguments against it. And so some people would say Cro-Magnon is not a subspecies. But I think that the argument that I would put forward is that the earliest Cro-Magnons from Europe and the proto-Cro-Magnons we were looking at in the Levant are by all likelihood direct hybrid uh, uh, people from Neanderthals and what we assume to be early archaic Homo sapiens. So in that regard, if they are the progeny of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, then they would be a subspecies. And by all accounts, some people would call it a race. Like I joked online, if these were dogs, then and canines, they'd be breeds.
Right,
And
exactly. Yeah.
so, give it a name. I don't care.
Yeah, we're all quite sensitive about terminology in the evolutionary biology world. I don't know why I said we. I'm not a part of it, but I am fascinated by it. I have some questions about your thoughts on speciation, but first,
Okay.
could you remind us what we've talked about so far in a brief as
Great.
possible? Like, because we've talked for I'd say almost 4 hours now.
All right.
So
So let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen
perfect.
as I do this. So let's get this going here. Share. I'm going to do screen one. I need to do advanced, don't I? Or where's the audio? Share sound. Boom. All right.
Boom,
Sharing.
on the fly.
And I'm going to move that over here. And I'm going to go. All right. So we're going to do the recap really quickly. Um, so we are talking about a location in the Levant where we know genetically it was a hotbed for Homo sapien and Neanderthal hybridization. This big circle right here. Over in Europe, we have other locations where we know hybridization happened, and these we're calling Cro-Magnon. Uh, we learned a lot about the genetic history of Neanderthals. We have theories about why they went extinct. One being that the Neanderthals' Y chromosome was replaced by Homo sapiens' Y chromosome. And in a lot of different ways, we could think of uh, Neanderthal men being replaced genetically by Homo sapien men. And that's what we see in the fossil record and in the genetic history. Um, we talked about the potential that because we inherited religion from Neanderthals, how much religion did we inherit? Did we inherit the notion of God from Neanderthals? And then that ties into mythologies associated with inheriting advanced knowledge, like basic knowledge, like how to make a boat and things like that. So right now we are jumping to the Levant. We're going to hit really briefly on some anatomy, and then we're going to skip to the mythologies. Sound good?
Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Now, what questions did you have before I go on?
I have some very kind of obscure basic questions that are only tangentially related.
And Elijah.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's
Dang.
okay. So in pop culture, obviously we think of Neanderthals as like, the Geico commercial, like
Right.
cavemen, brutes, compared to Homo sapiens, right? But what does the anthropology world, the archaeology world, do they share that pop culture view, or is that something that's just purely cultural and has no credence at all?
It's a mix because we see some pretty advanced examples of Neanderthals making art, burying their dead, utilizing the carcass of large animals to make huts. All of those things we learned from them and we did them a little bit better, so to speak.
Okay.
So how to live in a cave, that sort of stuff the Neanderthals were doing in Europe before we were. So we learned a lot from them, but we also see some pretty pathologic behaviors in their culture associated with inbreeding. We see examples of cannibalism.
Mm.
So I don't know. I mean, how accurate is that Geico commercial? They seem pretty modern in that commercial. So
Right.
maybe that was pretty. Maybe I just who knows what they look like. They could probably look fairly normal to us in terms of like what did they look like? Did they look like a caveman or did they look like a Homo sapien, but just a little bit different? I mean, I think that that's really the big question mark in my mind right now.
Yeah, I mean, so I've taught anatomy for quite some time, never comparative anatomy. I don't think I'll be any use to you tonight, but one thing I do notice is the variety in um, bone sizes, shapes. The landmarks can look incredibly different from one human to another. Obviously, within the same species, or even skulls can look pretty different. And so when I see a Neanderthal skull, it's like, well, yeah, that makes maybe a little bit more different than I'm used
Yeah,
to seeing, but it's really hard to say
it
what
is.
how different they would have looked. They may not have really looked that different at all, to your point, which is fascinating. But
Yeah, it's the one thing that I would say in terms of how to is it can you differentiate a species by morphology? If we hang our hats on some key anatomical features that are absolutely seen only in Neanderthals or in whatever species. And if we just say, if those anatomical features are present, then they must be Neanderthals. It's some great
yeah,
proportion. And we can just, if we can hang our hat on that, then we can make sense of a lot of things. Like, for instance, Neanderthal teeth. And a lot of archaic teeth, but in specific Neanderthal teeth, when you think about them compared to Homo sapiens, modern Homo sapiens, very large. The rib cage is much wider. It's a barrel-shaped chest. We didn't have that shape of a rib. They have we inherited a lot of genes for height from Neanderthals. And when some of those genes go bad, they develop dwarfism and like
mm,
especially short arms. So there's characteristics of Neanderthals morphologically that are unique. And I think what's interesting about that is we'll see some of those characteristics get blended with characteristics that we only associate to be in Homo sapiens. Things like teeth size, aspects of the jaw. Let's get into that and we'll just kind of go through some. I want to do a real quick introductory of the fossils, who they were, the time periods these fossils come from, how they were found, and then I'm going to try to hit the really important stuff before
yeah,
we
that sounds great.
okay, let's do it. So this is the Mount Carmel cave. This is the cave system that Elijah was in when he had the Baal Yahweh battle. All right, so in that cave, they have an example of this fossil called Tabun 1. She was a female that is, by all accounts, the most recent fossil from that cave because it's the highest up. Beneath her, and she was a Neanderthal, definitely a Neanderthal. Below her is Tabun 2, which was only a jaw, and it's huge. Like they talk about how monstrous this jaw was, and it was a man. Now, they assigned at that early on that Tabun 2 could have been anywhere from 250,000 years old. They couldn't tell. But Tabun 1, they thought 30,000 years old initially. Over next to them was the Skull Cave, and they found a lot of what they classify to be archaic Homo sapiens. We're going to look at school 5 and 4. And they, because these people were buried in a cave together in positions of ritual burial. They think these were familial in sort of the sense of an inherited lineage of
Yeah,
rulership, so to speak, in this local area. They were preserved in these caves and buried there. What they'll say is that, and you have to excuse me, I'm getting over a little bit of cough. What they'll say is that this cave is representative of the Neanderthal type at one end of the spectrum, and at the other end of the spectrum is the Cro Magnon people. And so what they categorize in these fossil remains is the spectrum of those anatomical changes. So the different spectrums of people, and they'll talk about this stuff. I would play all of it, but I'm just going to try to skip through as much of this as possible. Excuse me. Here's where it gets really fun. We talk about some of those anatomical features. So these are the jaws from Topham Cave, Neanderthals. And we can see the top jaw is a very small jaw from a small woman who was maybe, I think, 4 foot something tall. I forget how tall she was exactly. But it is characteristic of these really large Neanderthal teeth, right? Like they're, if you had to, if you
Yeah.
didn't better, they're large for fitting into that jaw. Whereas down below, we see a much more modern proportioned looking jaw with a very prominent chin. The teeth are also more regular and sort of well organized. And they still say this is a Neanderthal, even though it looks very much like a Homo sapien, just with large teeth. It's found below Taban 1, so it seemingly is older, right? Like they just don't know how much. Well, over in the school cave, the cave right next to the Taban cave, they find school 5. And this jaw is very similar to Taban 2. I'm so sorry, folks.
Don't worry. Yeah, it's fine.
All right, so teeth size, very similar. Jaws don't look the same, except for the fact that they have a chin. It is what it is. The Tabe 2 is much bigger, millimeters bigger than Skull 5. But they're seemingly kind of the same in a lot of inheritable ways, like teeth size. There's a big distinguishing feature there. If you look at the Neanderthals, they've got 2 holes for the foramen magnum,
Hmm.
which is unique to Neanderthals. This is characteristic only in Neanderthals, whereas in Homo sapiens, gosh almighty, there's only one hole for the
Mental.
foramen magnum. Sorry, mental foramen. Sorry. What did I say? Sorry, something went down the throat the wrong way. Still coughing. All right,
Glad
and
you
so
glad you're still with us.
I'm sorry, man. It's not going to go away, so it's still going to. So bear with me. Um, so in school 4, which is above, so more modern, we see smaller teeth. So now we've crossed over into the thing where we're like, okay, this is definitely Homo sapien because the teeth size is no
Right.
longer representational of Neanderthals. It has one foramen magnum. But if you look at the heritability of the ramus of the jaw, it's very much like school 5. The very prominent chins. There's a whole lot that you would say, well, that looks like they're the same lineage of people. Like it's just the next school 4 is just smaller. Well, we know from their height that school 5 is as tall as they've ever discovered an archaic hominin that we have fossils for. They think he's 5'11", whereas school 4, 5'10". So these are very large, very tall people. And that's how the authors of this paper will discuss the school people as being tall, very large people. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, okay, I'm going to skip this because it's just too much. Uh, what they also talk about is that aspects of not only there being height, they also describe them as ultra modern. And that's a concept that's really important. Um, so here's their femurs. So what we have is school 5, we show their femur length, and then
Yeah.
we compare that to Neanderthals. Now, one of the things that's interesting to see here, and you tell me what you think, Trout, you notice how curved the Neanderthal bone is, and you can see
Yeah.
the the CD height.
Yeah.
Compare that to school 5, the older Homo sapien, and notice how curved its bone is. But the more recent, the presumably more modern, the quote unquote ultra modern proto-Cro Magnon, look how straight that femur is,
Yeah,
right?
it's interesting.
It's as if that deformity in Neanderthals was getting straightened out of time,
Yeah.
right? Like so that's kind of the mystery that they're looking at in these fossils as they see modernization happen in these caves. Does that make sense?
Remind me, yeah, remind me the dates for the. You don't have to give me the exact date, but the order. So which one's oldest?
Okay, so okay, that's Spy Cave. That's not part of this cave. In terms of the bottom two, the oldest is School 5,
Okay,
100, let's say 120,000 years ago. School 4, earliest is 100,000 years ago. So these are
gotcha.
very, 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 very old. We don't have examples of this type of modernity in fossils for this. Like they're super modern.
Wow.
Um, okay, just more modernization. No, what's interesting to say is that before we go on, is that in the bone length, the authors say that they estimate that the school people, the men and women, to demonstrate the same degree of sexual dimorphism, where the men are extremely large and the women aren't as large. They're 4 foot, 5 foot, whereas the men can get, a foot taller. And they say that that type of sexual dimorphism is comparable to what we find in Proto-Cro-Magnon. And as we talked about earlier, sexual dimorphism is a key ingredient to producing gigantism. You need the sexually dimorphous tiger to mate with a really large lion, and when you mate a really large tiger with a really large lion, that progeny is a giant liger. Um,
That's interesting.
we talked briefly about how much more do you want to talk about ultramodernism, or have I convinced you that we're looking at a series of hominins that are ultra modern?
I think I'm convinced.
All right.
But so I guess I don't. What's the significance of the word ultra modern? So what's like? What does that mean?
Well, okay, let's talk about that. So when we think about like curved bones, I was talking about the Neanderthal bones being curved. Well, we have two examples here of the forearm. This is probably the best bone to talk about that. Well, when we look at school women, their forearm bones are equally as curved as Neanderthal women. So even though we categorize them as Homo sapiens, they have this curved bone feature, which we think of as Neanderthal. But when we look at the school people, the school men, school 4 and 5, their bones are straight. Their ulnar and radius are very straight compared to all other examples of archaic hominins. And we can only find examples of that when we get to a modern Australian man's arm.
I was just gonna say the last one you put up, I would have called Homo sapien. So that is modern. But
Mhm.
Australian meaning a man from Australia today. Is that what this means?
An Aboriginal Australian, one of the first inhabitants of Australia.
Because I was gonna
That's
say school four looks pretty like I think if I saw that laying on a table, I would just assume that's Homo sapien, except it is very straight, like you
yeah,
said.
it's and
And
big.
there's no obliquity to the radius, which is weird. Their wrists must have been a bit different than ours. But
Hmm.
anyway, it is fascinating. I mean the curve on the first one is unbelievable.
Right? Right? It is. Well,
There aren't
here's
that was would probably be visible. I that's something where I'm thinking they
yeah.
would actually probably look a little different than
Yeah, they
that.
look dwarf-like, you know what I mean? Like stubby but thick, you know?
Interesting. Yeah.
So all right, so let's say like let's get to the ultra modern part of
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
okay? Because in a lot of their conversation, what they'll talk about is incredibly racially biased, and I'm going to say that up front. So we're going to have to ignore that aspect of their commentary. But what we talk about next is the ultra modern aspect of their bone structure. So on the left, we have a child from the school cave, and this is the one that they say is like ridiculously ultra modern. And we have the radius here. Comparing it to a medieval child from England
Mhm.
that still has the bowed nature. This is looking at it from one direction. We're going to rotate perspective and look at it from the side. Look how straight the child from the school caves radius is
Yeah.
compared to the medieval.
Yeah.
That is what they say to be ultra modern.
Gotcha. Okay, so I just need to abandon the notion of a range of years when hear the word ultramodern. Ultramodern meaning it is very similar to modern human anatomy.
It's superior to
Oh,
modern human anatomy. It's gone ahead of modern human anatomy.
superior in the sense that, if we're contrasting it to Neanderthals, it's more extremely Homo sapien in
It's
its
more
genetic.
extremely perfected Homo sapien, so to speak. Yes, it's more straight than our straight Homo sapien bones.
But
That
is there an advantage to that though? I think there is.
I mean, I got to assume a radius twisting, you'd want it to be as straight as possible, right? I mean, like,
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think there is some. I mean, because this is a question students would ask, like, why is the femur bowed like this? Because it's bowed anteriorly, and I think the assumption that the thing that's said, and I don't know if it's true, is that the curve causes them to flex more when they're absorbing shock, and it reduces the chance of fracture,
yeah,
or at least of like a compression type fracture. Maybe it increases the risk of like a green stick fracture. I don't know.
I
So
don't know.
it could be. I think the answer is we have no idea. It's just something that professors say, which there's
Yeah.
lots of
I mean,
history.
I think that the only thing that we can say with confidence is that the progression of bone morphology went from curvature to straight
Yeah,
amongst the people, the caves, and the age of the people in those caves. So it went,
yeah.
that's
Now
definitely the progression towards straight.
now that I get what you're saying, I'm going to say yes. You convinced me because we see it does. We kind of see this changing of these bones. That's pretty like
Yeah.
consistent, and then somehow these look like they were found at a shallower level, like they were found closer to present day than Homo sapien bones, but
Yeah.
obviously that's not the case. So
Obviously not. Yeah.
okay, cool, I
So
get it.
so there's even more interesting stuff, which is that it looks like evolution went backwards in Neanderthals before they went extinct. And to skip through things here as quickly as possible.
Well, I'm kind of curious about that, so keep going. Don't
Oh,
skip.
okay. Well, I won't skip it then. So then what we're looking at in A and B is these are a Sikh, which is a modern Egyptian man. B is an Englishman. And we see that this cross section here in A and B, that's the XY section through the pubis
Mm-hmm.
right here. So that's what we're looking at. And we see that in these modern examples of that cross section, they're pretty small, triangular. We see over here in C, this is the really modern school four. This is the ultra modern man with that, you know, extra modern zygomatic arch.
Yeah.
Super robust pelvis. Like his pelvis bone is really thick. Next to him, we have a gorilla, right? Like totally different species,
Yeah.
different cross-section shape, right?
Smaller.
Very different. Okay, now in E and F, here's where we have right, a European female. So it's a modern shape, and it's again small. And then we have this school 10 female. So this is what this modern proto-Cro Magnon woman from the school cave, that's her pubis. All of this is seemingly normal. And you're like, okay, well, the school man is just like got a whole like lot of bone in his pelvis.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think Tabun 1 looks like? Like, take a guess. Do you think it looks more like F, the school woman, school 10 or 9, or do you think it looks like the gorilla?
Remind me which one Taboon one is.
Tabun, we haven't seen Tabun 1. I'm asking you to
Okay.
guess.
Oh, just
Is it,
looking at it here, just looking
yeah,
at it here. Uh, it almost
guess.
looks like the pubic ramus is smaller
Okay.
than the
So
modern Homo sapien.
pubis ramus.
Sorry, so this cross section, and I'm just
Yeah,
looking at the XY picture, it almost looks like it's smaller.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Then the school man, but the gorilla has this weird triangular shape. All right, so
Yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying.
I'm not set up the punchline well. So yeah, that triangular shape is unique to gorillas.
Gotcha.
Tabun 1 is the woman from the Tabun cave. She's a Neanderthal woman found at the highest level, so presumably the most recent hominin deposited in the caves. That's what her pubis looks like,
Oh, that's interesting.
isn't it?
Wait, so what's G?
G is her left, I
Left
think,
and then H
right.
is right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
G is
that's interesting.
right. Yeah, it looks like the gorillas. but it doesn't have the prominence of the A. So it's almost like shit. That woman's pelvis was getting like really fragile. Like
Right.
maybe there's a reason why they weren't able to carry many babies,
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
right? Like
I see what you're saying about
I never
like,
hear that conversation and why Neanderthals went extinct.
oh, I see what you're saying. Is there more examples like this, or are we pretty limited?
No, there's a lot of other examples, like, but they don't always go backwards. Like there's examples in the jaw where even though school four is super modern, there's things in his jaw that went retrograde.
Hmm.
So I think one of the other things that they point to is that in school five or four, I forget which, their forearms were really short compared to their the humerus. So it's
You, oh yeah, that's weird.
there's like weird anatomy going on. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Do you have a like a hypothesis as to what types of things would cause that? Is this maybe back to this inbreeding idea potentially?
I think we're looking at the genes of Neanderthals. I think that it's we're just looking at permeations of those genes taking shape and in different ways.
Gotcha.
But like I would love to just take a moment to hear from the authors and to let the authors speak because we can I want to respectfully point to new information that will um, support what we're talking about here. But let's play the
Yeah.
clip.
Variability. We are of the opinion that the variability found amongst the fossil people of Mount Carmel is greater in degree and in kind than is to be observed in any local community of modern times. Had the Mount Carmel people been discovered not collectively in one place, but separately in diverse localities, each excavator would have been convinced that a new and separate form of humanity had been unearthed. So great does one Carmelite individual differ from another. How are we to explain the structural instability of the Mount Carmel people? Do they represent a people in the throes of an evolutionary transition and therefore unstable and plastic in their genetic constitution? Or is the variability due to hybridity, a mingling of two diverse peoples or races? We shall see that the Mount Carmel people represent a series which can be arranged between a Neanderthal form at one end and a Cro Magnon form at the other. Is it possible that Neanderthal and Cro Magnon paleoanthropic and neanthropic stocks had met on the flanks of Mount Carmel in mid-Pleistocene times, and that the fossil bones described here represent the progeny of their union? We have given the supposition of hybridity our serious consideration and have rejected it. To win support for such a theory, we should have to produce the fossil remains of a neanthropic form of man in Palestine from a level as old or older than the Levalloiso Mousterian of Mount Carmel, as well as the remains of a fully evolved Neanderthal form. We have no such evidence.
Okay. So did you get what they're saying and their problem with basically the hypothesis that I put forward?
Sorry, I muted myself. That there's no. I get. Tell me.
Okay. So they're saying, and this is at a time in history, the 1920s, when no one acknowledged the possibility of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals having any type of sexual interaction. That it
Okay.
was refuted. No one acknowledged it. Neanderthals were stupid. They were
Right.
cavemen. This is old thought. And the idea that Homo sapiens, especially in the Levant, where religion, Western religion comes from, there's no way anybody wanted to connect those dots. So they're asking the exact question no one once asked, while they're in turn also looking for evidence of Caucasians. And I need to say that like purposefully, like they're looking for the first white people. They went to Israel with that purpose in mind. Okay, and so they think they've done this in these fossils, in this change and hybridization. Well, whatever. They think that these white people have emerged from the dust of the Levant, and that's
Right.
the argument they're going to try to make. And that's why I've arranged those pictures the way that they are. That anyway, so they're saying that they don't acknowledge that or think it's possible because one, they don't have examples of a Neanderthal, a full Neanderthal in the Levant at that time period in the same level of dirt, and they don't have a modern Homo sapien in the dirt at the same level. And so therefore they won't acknowledge the possibility of hybridity.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah.
Right. So I get it, skirps, they're skirping the idea of, like I don't see X, Y, and Z evidence. All right, so fine.
I mean, I guess you could argue that at least at this one site, they
Exactly.
they they don't have the evidence they need to accept the hypothesis. I mean, that's fair. Yeah.
You're exactly right. And they don't have enough information at this time to make that statement with definity. You know, thousands of archaeologists have been over those sites now, and we know a lot more. We know that in the Levant, and we've already talked about, and this is why I set this up the way that I did early on. We talked about early on the Nesha people, and these are this weird hybrid mix of Homo erectus Neanderthals in the Levant, but they had fairly advanced stone tools, and they showed signs of stone tool knowledge exchange. So it was this example of hybridization and technology transfer that I was trying to point to. Either way, we have examples of Neanderthals in the area having sex with a lot of other species. You know, I'm sorry. The fact that you don't have something that looks like your Neanderthal from Europe there is not my problem. Like they didn't look the
Yeah.
same, they look like that.
Right. Right.
Give it a name. And also, so that's one end of their spectrum with Neanderthals. And we know genetically now they were all over the Levant, all over that time period. It was like the Neanderthals lived in the Levant throughout that entire time period. Um, in the cave next to school, just not too far away, is the Kafze caves. And in those caves, there's unquestionably early modern Homo sapiens. These people look very much like Jebel Irhoud. Jebel Irhoud is dated to 370,000 years ago. The Kafze caves is dated to the same time period as the school and the Taban caves. So all three of these caves were living and inhabited at generally the same time in a linear gradient from Tabun through school to Kafze, representing the full spectrum of Neanderthal and Homo sapiens. So we know their conclusion about hybridity is wrong. I respect all of those people. I think they did an amazing job, but their conclusion's wrong. And the reason we know that they're wrong about even the Caucasian aspect of it is that there are the Khoisan people who have lived in South Africa and been genetically distinct for 200 plus thousand years. And they have all of the features that we're looking at in the school cave.
Gotcha.
The chin, the Roman nose, the facial profile pulled. These people have been there that way genetically for 200,000 years earlier than the caves we're looking at. So these people were there. Those genes were present in Africa, and most likely, even if we don't find their remains, we know they walked out of Africa through the Levant. So that's most likely what these people look like. That's most likely what Adam looked like. Okay. Oh, sorry. We were just talking about him. And so this is where we know the white dot over here shows the least amount of interbreeding with Neanderthals. Anyway, that's the Khoisan people.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Okay. Now we get to hear somebody who actually called it right. And I think, and I'm sorry, Alfredo's not here because he said it right as well. He thought what we were looking at was Neanderthals becoming Homo sapiens. And that's really what I think as well. So can I play another clip?
Please.
All right, here we go.
Dr. Alice Hrdlicka may now claim that the presence of a Proto-Cro Magnon type among the cave dwellers of Mount Carmel is a confirmation of the theory he advocated in his Huxley lecture of 1927, namely that the Neanderthalians of Europe did not become extinct, but in the course of a rapid evolution became transmuted into modern man. Dr. Hrdlicka believes that evolution was speeded up under the pressure of a growing Arctic environment. Palestine lay beyond the ice sheet, and we cannot invoke glacial conditions to account for the evolutionary state of the Mount Carmel people. It might be asserted that the right interpretation of the state of affairs found among the Mount Carmel people is very simple, that Neanderthal man is there being transformed into modern man of the Cro Magnon type. This certainly is a simple explanation and a possible one, yet it does not seem to us to be the most probable. In the first place, it is to be noted that the neanthropic type, which is making its appearance amongst the school people, is a very particular form of modern man, one of the white or European type. For concerning the racial status of Cro Magnon man, there should be no doubt. All his features are European, Caucasian, or white. Our belief is that at Mount Carmel, we have reached a transitional zone which leads from one ancient area of racial differentiation, the Neanderthal or Paleoanthropic, to another ancient area lying farther to the east, a Neanthropic area where the Proto-Caucasian or Proto-Cro Magnon type of man was being evolved. The evidence is now convincing that in mid-Pleistocene times, the inhabitants of Europe, of the continent at least, were all Neanderthal in type. But we have seen that the type becomes modified as we proceed from west to east, and that in Palestine we find a transitional type leading towards the Neanthropic type. It seems logical to us to assume that when the wide tracts of Western Asia of mid-Pleistocene times are entered, we shall find ourselves in the homeland of the Proto-Caucasian.
Okay. I'm not going to disagree with anything that may be accurate about genetics and where Caucasians come from in the Caucasus Mountains. That's fine. I don't know that we have evidence that the genes for white skin, blue eyes, all the things they want to say are European and Caucasian. I don't know that they stretch back in the Homo sapien people or even Neanderthals uh, conclusively to say that. Like, I think that they could in Neanderthals. What we would be looking at is not that white genes emerged in Homo sapiens, but that we picked up Caucasian genes from Neanderthals, and that's yeah, but it's not like the whiteness just emerged from these people. Like that's not what we know genetically. Like these people are wrong in their assumption. They're wrong to assume that Cro-Magnons were white. That's not accurate. Maybe later, yeah, like 10,000 years ago, yeah, they were. But 40, 50,000 years ago when they first interacted with Neanderthals, I think everybody was dark back then. I don't think anybody had light skin.
Kind of a
So
kind of a weird thing to get hung up on, but yeah, I understand why they probably were, but
it's
it's
1920s.
yeah,
It's is Palestine. They this is where Elijah talked to Yahweh. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
they're motivated to find white people, right? I
right.
promise you. Um, okay, so we're almost. I think we're caught up now to where we were. We last tried to like skip to the end here. Um, so now we have this sense that what we're looking at is in these caves the modernization of a Neanderthal into a Homo sapien, the perfection of human form. However you want to think about it, that's kind of what is happening over
It's-
time.
just a quick question for my own ignorance here. So, when we're saying the Neanderthals are transitioning into Homo sapiens, we're saying that their genes are being blended into an existing Homo sapien population, right? Or are we saying that Homo sapiens literally emerge out of a certain group of early Neanderthals and then they become two distinct species? Or like what exactly do we mean by that last slide?
So yeah, I mean, I could say this probably the wrong way, a whole bunch of ways, and probably the right way, only one way. What I think is maybe happening is that there's a stable population of Neanderthals in the Levant for a long time. And out of the Levant, out of Africa through the Levant into Eurasia, Homo sapiens, like those Khoisan people, are walking through there.
Gotcha.
And some of those men probably mated with Neanderthal women, left their DNA in those stable populations. Maybe those men born to those Neanderthal women who carried the Y chromosome of Homo sapiens were more successful for a variety of reasons. Kind of
Sure.
talked about a little bit of reasons why. We talked about the mitochondrial DNA from in a really early archaic Homo sapien intergressing into Neanderthals, and that Neanderthal women were primed to mate with Homo sapien men, and that when they did so, they would be genetically more favorable. Maybe, because Neanderthal women had smaller pelvises, they mated with a smaller man and they had more babies. Who knows, right? Like there's
Right.
all these different reasons. But that's the idea that I would put forward is that Homo sapien men left their DNA in the Levant as they walked out. And over time, we see that Homo sapien Neanderthal DNA wrestle with each other to find modernity because more and more Homo sapien DNA got contributed to that population until we get basically a Homo sapien version of a Neanderthal. And
Okay.
that's what we're looking at from school four is a Neanderthal whose form has been quote unquote perfected and made straight.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Okay,
Yep.
good. Yeah, that makes sense. All
It
right.
does.
Um, okay, so let's keep going here. So now let's talk about mythology,
Here we
right?
go.
Here we go. All right. Um, I wish I had somebody to refill my drink. All right. So, all right. So
There's no
we
editing in this.
no editing in baseball. There's no editing in baseball. That's right. All right. So let's talk about the Book of Enoch, everybody's favorite. Um, so I have to thank David. He pointed me to this and he mentioned after one of our first conversations, he's like, well, have you ever heard about Mount Hermon? And it was like nothing clicked in my head. Mount Hermon is mentioned in the Book of Enoch.
Right.
It is the mountain that the fallen angels descend to when they take women
And
as
it's
their
where they
wife.
make their pact.
It's where they make their pact, right? And okay, so like I said, this is a testable hypothesis, right? Like I can't put fossils in the ground, right? Like if it's there, it's there. Like if these things correlate, then they correlate. So Mount Hermon is only 42 miles away from the Sea of Galilee. Okay, it's a hop, skip, and a jump. Big jump, but it's, a jump. Um, Near the Sea of Galilee, if you were to go into ChatGPT like I did and type in, okay, find me the closest Neanderthal fossil to Mount Hermon, it's going to tell you to go look at the Sea of Galilee and the Amund Valley.
Okay.
So sorry. The Amund Valley, you will find the closest fossil to Mount Hermon, which is Amund 1. Amund 1 is the fossil's large skeleton remains. This is the tallest Neanderthal ever discovered. Ever discovered is a giant Neanderthal as close to Mount Hermon as it gets. You don't find a Neanderthal closer to Mount Hermon besides the tallest known Neanderthal, right? So giants, as described in the Book of Enoch, in this scenario would be Neanderthal hybrids like Amud 1. Now, why can we think of Amud 1 as a Neanderthal Homo sapien hybrid beyond its height? Well, Amud 1 is known to have a progressive chin. You don't find chins in Neanderthals. Where'd that chin come from? It didn't come from a Homo sapien. Where did that mythology for two species breeding together, making giants, what we think very likely happened 42 miles away from it's I mean it's
So
pretty
so
highly
so
organized.
what are you saying? Spell it out for us.
I'm
What is
saying that Amud 1 is a descendant of a fallen angel. And
Yeah, buddy.
I would say that Amun 1, if you needed to give an identity to Tabun 2, that really large jaw that comes from the top, the Neanderthal cave that's found below the full skeleton of the woman, I would say he's probably around 5 feet 10 and probably looks a lot like Amud 1, just has a
Okay.
bigger chest.
I have questions because I thought you were going in a completely different direction
All right.
with this. So now that I know this is the direction you're going, I can relax knowing that I'm on your side, but I can play devil's advocate now. So
All right.
um
Well, we'll
I
talk
thought
about angels.
I thought the claim was going to be that we have this evidence that um maybe this hybridization occurred and that these myths come from this like ancient cultural memory of a time when there were different peoples and there were hybrids and stuff. And so that really all the story is doing is describing like a very mundane sort of evolutionary history. It
Yep.
sounds like that's actually not what you're saying. What you're saying is
No, no, that's
that
what I'm saying.
that is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. So in this description, who is the fallen angel? Which species?
Neanderthals would be the fallen angels, and Neanderthals specifically that uh, were seafaring, they were advanced, and they probably were at the end of their life. They were about to go extinct, and they needed Homo sapien women in order to breed with. And like these were probably the very last Neanderthals. Like imagine like we think the Neanderthals lasted 30,000 years. Maybe they lasted another 15. And then all of a sudden they're buttoned up right against the Younger Dryas event. And then their
Mm,
seafaring ability is really impactful and meaningful in an important way. So all of these mythologies do line up very closely to our biblical um, interpretation of
that's pretty interesting.
origins of man.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't take a rocket surgeon to see the rhymes here with these two ideas. Um, did you like
I
that?
did, I did, I
That's-
did,
so
I
okay,
did.
but just now let's just start over. Walk me through it again. So
All right.
Amud, um, he's our oldest example of a Neanderthal and closest to Mount Hermon. It's the closest example of a
He is the
Neanderthal.
closest
Okay.
example of a Neanderthal to Mount Hermon. So there's no other Neanderthal closer to Mount Hermon fossil that we know of. So if we're to look for an example of a Neanderthal near Mount Hermon, we would find the tallest Neanderthal with the chin.
And he so okay, so he has a chin, and he got that chin from a Neanderthal, not from a Neanderthal mother. He had a Neanderthal mother, most likely, and a what father? A Homo
A
sapien.
Homo sapien, let's just like, and it's a generalization to say, how do male genes begin to take over in male Neanderthals? We would we can equate maybe the chin to a Homo sapien Y chromosome. That's
Okay,
in my mind, that's how I'm doing it. I
that
can't
makes
say,
sense.
it would be like, it's conjecture to say that, but that's in my mind how I'm intellectualizing an example of genetics taking form in morphology.
Okay, so I'm just trying to make sure I understand all the pieces here. So in this case, the fallen angel is a Homo sapien, and the
No,
daughters no.
no. Fallen
Okay,
angel again is okay. So, okay. Yeah, no, there's no straight line that I would try to connect between
okay,
a fallen angel being a Homo sapien man. I see why you're saying that. No, I still recognize this to be a multi-generational narrative that it would be wrong to say I'm gonna point to Marduk later on maybe and say like that's who Marduk is, but that was I can't do that. You can't.
right.
So there is a blending and a mixture of narratives, and I think there's multiple examples of that confusion and mythologies at this point in time. So it's not that tightly woven for me to be able to
Sure,
say.
sure. So it's an allegory, but it's pointing to this idea that species were interbreeding and hybridizing, creating giants, right?
Yes.
Because the children of the fallen angels and the daughters of men were, I guess, were hybrid giants. Cro
Yeah.
Magnon, maybe.
Yeah. Whomever the fathers were, whomever the mothers were, when they got together and two species mingled, boom,
And what do
giants.
we know about the Cro Magnon? They were probably maybe more intelligent, creative, taller, and so it's reasonable that they would be men of renown.
Exactly.
Gosh,
Exactly. It
it's
picked
it's a
up.
pretty tight little hypothesis. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's pretty good. It's
Like
really
it.
good. Yeah, it's pretty good, man. It's fascinating, obviously. Wow, that's interesting.
I'm glad that you like it. It's gonna get weird. All
It's
right, let's do it.
it's getting weirder than this. All right, let's do it.
All right, so we've gone through everything up to now, and right now we want to go and we want to parse through the mythologies and we want to look for evidence of Neanderthals. Oh, I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna refresh my drink when I'm gonna play some audio. Okay, this is gonna be perfect. All right, so we're gonna look for two specific narratives. The extinction of the Neanderthals. If Neanderthals lasted another 15,000 years, but we ran into them and their last interactions created these mythologies, then those mythologies define the extinction of the Neanderthals. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay. Then lastly, we want an explanation for an omniscient God. Like we have this narrative continually from our oldest mythologies of omniscience, of God's knowing our thoughts. Where did that come from?
Oh
Okay,
my
so
gosh,
all
we're
right, so
just
we talked about
tackling some big topics.
quickly. So we talked about the family tree of the Anunnaki that Anu mated with, potentially the great Sky Mother, maybe a white Neanderthal woman, maybe, and Ki, an Earth Mother, maybe a darker skinned woman from Africa, let's just say Lilith. And two children were born to them, the sons of God, Enki and Enlil. And so we have this mythological narrative being born at the first mythology of the sons of God, the Bene Elohim, being really like this Game of Thrones narrative of two brothers, right? Like
Yeah.
potentially look different, who have different properties. All right, the Bene Elohim, Enki and Enlil. Um, sorry, I'll skip ahead here. We have this idea from history of we know from history that an ancient Neanderthal man interbred with a Homo sapien woman at some point. And there's genetics that will explain why. Let's just say that Levant Neanderthal was from the Tabun cave, and the archaic Homo sapien 300,000 years ago, that was someone from Jebel Irhoud. So the closest examples that we have. Their progeny would have been a hybrid Neanderthal Homo sapien, possibly somebody from the School Cave, possibly Tabun too. Something hybrid like that has gained enormous stature, like that huge jaw that we see, but these modernization in the teeth. And then finally, what we see at the end is we see this modernization of man, and we're calling them proto-Cro-Magnons, and that might be this school four. So think about these as characters. Think about Apsu as being this ancient Neanderthal. Think about Inky being this giant hybrid who's all of a sudden gained intellectual strength and cognitive power. And then think of Marduk as the perfected human form that has acquired Homo sapien anatomy, but maybe retained Neanderthal intellect. Okay, I'm going to press play and hope to God everything works while I go refresh my drink. This is a long clip, and I'm going to race back here and flip the screen to try to keep up with the script. Bear with me. This is for the audio people.
Let's set it up first. What is it? What is it?
Oh, I'm sorry, man. I should set this up. And I need to make some qualifiers first. This is the oldest mythology that we have, the Enuma Elish. This is the first examples that we have to hear about Enki, these people, Apsu, Tiamat, Marduk. This is a continuous narrative that really is a template for everything that's to come. I want to qualify a couple of things. You're going to hear some names and not immediately connect them to our main narrative with Enki. In Sumerian, they have different names for different people or for the same person. Ninmud will be, think of him as Enki. If you hear Ea, EA, think of him as Enki. He's got different names, but always
Gotcha.
that's Enki.
Okay.
Yeah, this is the oldest myth.
All right, let's do it.
I'll be right back too. I'm going to press play. I'm going to be back in 1 minute.
The Enuma Elish, Tablet 1. When the heavens above did not exist, and earth beneath had not come into being, there was Apsu, the first in order, their begetter, and Demiurge Tiamat, who gave birth to them all. They had mingled their waters together, before meadowland had coalesced and reed bed was to he found. When not one of the gods had been formed or had come into being, when no destinies had been decreed, the gods were created within them. Lamu and Lahamu were formed and came into being. While they grew and increased in stature, Anshar and Kishar, who excelled them, were created. They prolonged their days. They multiplied their years. Anu, their son, could rival his fathers. Anu, the son, equaled Anshar, and Anu begat Enki, his own equal. Enki was the champion among his fathers, profoundly discerning, wise, of robust strength, very much stronger than his father's begetter, Anshar. He had no rival among the gods, his brothers. The divine brothers came together. Their clamor got loud, throwing Tiamat into a turmoil. They jarred the nerves of Tiamat, and by their dancing they spread alarm in Andruna. Apsu did not diminish their clamor, and Tiamat was silent when confronted with them. Their conduct was displeasing to her, yet though their behavior was not good, she wished to spare them. Thereupon Apsu, the begetter of the great gods, called Mumu, his vizier, and addressed him. Vizier Mumu, who gratifies my pleasure, come, let us go to Tiamat. They went and sat, facing Tiamat, as they conferred about the gods, their sons. Apsu opened his mouth and addressed Tiamat. Their behavior has become displeasing to me, and I cannot rest in the daytime or sleep at night. I will destroy and break up their way of life. That silence may reign, and we may sleep. When Tiamat heard this, she raged and cried out to her spouse. She cried in distress, fuming within herself. She grieved over the plotted evil. How can we destroy what we have given birth to? Though their behavior causes distress, let us tighten discipline graciously. Mumu spoke up with counsel for Apsu, as from a rebellious vizier was the counsel of his Mumu. Destroy, my father, that lawless way of life, that you may rest in the daytime and sleep by night. Apsu was pleased with him. His face beamed, because he had plotted evil against the gods, his sons. Mumu put his arms around Apsu's neck. He sat on his knees, kissing him. What they plotted in their gathering was reported to the gods, their sons. The gods heard it and were frantic. They were overcome with silence and sat quietly. Ea, who excels in knowledge, the skilled and learned, Ea, who knows everything, perceived their tricks. He fashioned it and made it to be all-embracing. He executed it skillfully as supreme, his pure incantation. He recited it and set it on the waters. He poured sleep upon him as he was slumbering deeply. He put Apsu to slumber as he poured out sleep. And Mumu, the counselor, was breathless with agitation. He split Apsu's sinews, ripped off his crown, carried away his aura, and put it on himself. He bound Apsu and killed him. Mumu he confined and handled roughly. He set his dwelling upon Apsu and laid hold on Mumu, keeping the nose rope in his hand. After Ea had bound and slain his enemies, had achieved victory over his foes, he rested quietly in his chamber. He called it Apsu, whose shrines he appointed. Then he founded his living quarters within it, and Ea and Damkina, his wife, sat in splendor. In the chamber of the destinies, the room of the archetypes, the wisest of the wise, the sage of the gods, Biel was conceived. In Apsu was Marduk born, in pure Apsu was Marduk born. Ea his father begat him, Damkina his mother bore him. He sucked the breasts of goddesses, a nurse reared him and filled him with terror. His figure was well developed. The glance of his eyes was dazzling. His growth was manly. He was mighty from the beginning. Anu, his father's begetter, saw him. He exulted and smiled, his heart filled with joy. Anu rendered him perfect. His divinity was remarkable, and he became very lofty, excelling them in his attributes. His members were incomprehensibly wonderful, incapable of being grasped with the mind, hard even to look on. 4 were his eyes, 4 his ears. Flames shot forth as he moved his lips. His 4 ears grew large, and his eyes likewise took in everything. His figure was lofty and superior in comparison with the gods. His limbs were surpassing, his nature was superior. Mariutu, Mariutu, the sun god, the sun god of the gods. He was clothed with the aura of the 10 gods, so exalted was his strength. The 50 dreads were loaded upon him. Anu formed and gave birth to the 4 winds. He delivered them to him. My son, let them whirl. He formed dust and set a hurricane to drive it. He made a wave to bring consternation on Tiamat. Tiamat was confounded. Day and night she was frantic. The gods took no rest. They, in their minds, they plotted evil.
I'm going to stop right there. It goes on, but that's kind of the introduction that I think encapsulates this cyclic narrative. Like, I think you recognize maybe one cycle of generational destruction, and then it's repeated again, first for Inky killing Apsu, and then his progeny eventually killing Tiamat. And so we have this extinction narrative captured very succinctly in the first ever story. What do you think?
Yeah, it's I mean, what do you make of it? What do you take from this? Do you make of the description of his stature something that they're trying to
Oh,
convey
yeah.
his hybridization
Yeah.
idea? Or?
I mean, I think we see the birth of a motif that's told in countless stories throughout the Middle East and Egypt, even about the perfection of human form, where we see, if we imagine our characters to be Neanderthals who have stubby, curved bones, stubby limbs, and look like dwarfs, all of a sudden, after generational sort of like lineage of Ansar, let's say Ansar was the first Homo sapien male to be introduced to this colony, and their progeny led to Anu, but Anu is maybe some partial Homo sapien, has mainly Neanderthal genes, but is considered the god. and then he gives birth to Inky and Enlil, and then you know what I mean? So we have this continuum modernization where Inky is described as larger, stronger, smarter, knows all, capable of knowing the devious ideas of Anu, or I'm sorry, Apsu, and figures out how to kill Apsu and take his home. I mean, if we were to trace these time periods to the people I'm suggesting, when he took his home, Apsu, that's a cave. He
Mm.
took over someone's cave. You know what I
So if
mean?
I know you can't know, but if you were gonna guess the, you know, first of all, if you could remind me when we think this was written, but and then second, when do you think these events, I know it's not one event, it's maybe thousands of years of events, but when did these events that they're describing take place?
I don't
If you
know,
had to
man.
guess. I
If
mean, are
I
we
had to
saying
guess,
you think there's
if
a
I had to guess when like these clay tablets were made, I would say within 5,000 years,
and
6,000.
do you think they're writing about an event that took place 100,000 years ago or
Yeah,
50,000?
maybe. I think that there could be a memory somehow captured in the stars that tell a similar story, and that's how it was sustained for this long.
There's an
Maybe
oral
there,
tradition. Wow. Yeah.
maybe there's an oral tradition associated with. Let's get to it. I think it's
Yeah.
a perfect transition to talk about. I'm going to skip the Epic of Gilgamesh, not because it's not interesting to people, but I feel like it's all of these things will be self-evident if we just skip through this. I want us to talk about Damkina and why she shall not bring back her burden in the future. So this is a story that people probably don't know about. And this is another example of this sort of cyclic reworking of a narrative to be slightly different, where in this story, Damkina is a central figure because she unleashes her burden. And that causes the downfall of Enlil and all of the gods that we associate to be the Anunnaki. The story is confusing, and I'm not going to try to even make sense of it because it's hard to, because names no longer make sense. But all we have are these very key figures of Damkina, Marduk, and Enlil. There's a confusion where first Marduk is captured, then tables are turned, and Enlil's captured. And there's a confrontation between the two. And for whatever reason, because Marduk was insulted or somebody insulted somebody, Damkina unleashes her burden. And the point of this story is that it needs to be told that Damkina shall not bring back her burden in the future because it caused the downfall of Enlil.
Okay.
And it was at the hands of Marduk. So it's this sort of like cyclic retelling of the same story that we have from the Enuma Elish, but it's specifically this story is directed towards two people. Two people this story is meant for. The first are the gods. It's a warning for the gods. But the second is the people of the future, us.
Mm.
This is a story for us, given to us by Damkina, according to their mythology. And the only simple explanation for Damkina's burden, a woman's burden is childbirth.
Right.
Kina's child is Marduk. So Marduk being the burden of Damkina overthrowing Enlil yet again. So
Hmm.
we have this narrative marriage between Damkina, whomever she may be. In my story, she's a Homo sapien woman from Africa marrying into this lineage of Neanderthals and unleashing as a result her burden, a man of renown, a man who would overthrow the generations that came before. And that's, in my perspective, an
You're throwing
interpretation.
me off because you have images of people like wearing like comparatively modern clothes compared to the time. So we're not. I keep my timelines keep getting mixed up here. So I'm like, wait a
Sorry,
second.
man. Like,
This
yeah,
is
this
a
is
hundred.
AI,
We're talking
AI
about a
generated art.
100,000 years before this would have people would have had crowns like this. Okay, gotcha. Got one of them's a
I mean,
Viking, apparently.
what people don't understand, he does have horns. Um, what people don't understand is that if you want to generate AI art, you actually have to specify everybody needs to be clothed. And it's hard to specify how to clothe someone
It's
get out.
just for people who haven't tried to do AR, it's actually much more complicated than you would expect to get them to do what you want. So, but okay, no, I'm on board. That makes sense. That's interesting. I mean, I'm trying to see if that like rings or rhymes with like the curse of a painful childbirth in the Genesis story, or not, or if it's any overlap there.
It's just another example of the lineage between gods and mortals, potentially Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, that produces this catastrophic event. And the catastrophe is supposed to be averted by this story being told to future people, us.
Mm.
And so they talk about no one has an explanation for this story. And I would just put forward that this could be a potential explanation. And
But
one in which
what are they want? What are they wanting to us to avoid though?
the elimination of entire species, the extinction of
Interesting.
entire species. So when Marduk overthrows Enlil in this story, it's Marduk overthrowing it's Marduk the Homo sapien, the perfected Homo sapien, the even if he might be part Neanderthal, it's him overthrowing his predecessors, his father's father, his uncle Enlil,
Mm.
who would be representational of Neanderthals. And so it's this narrative metaphor for the extinction of the Neanderthals. And that's
Yeah.
what we continually have in these very old stories as Apsu's killed by Marduk, as Tiamat's killed by Marduk, as Enlil's killed by Marduk. It's this continual story of these perfected hybrid men of renown that caused the demise of their predecessors.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yep.
All right.
And
So I
anything I
want
say now will lead us on a huge tangent. So just yeah, just keep going.
all right, so let's take a right turn because we gotta take this right turn eventually. Okay, let's get back to Genesis. And I want to talk about some really specific things about mythology, not specifically Sumerian, but Judeo-Christian. In the first clip that I played, we talked about Genesis 6, and this being the account where there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men and bare them children, they became the mighty men. So basically, Neanderthals, Homo sapiens mate, and eventually we get the perfected school for perfect human that we talk about in the school cave. And I would say that you could associate to be Marduk, let's say. Anyway, the next verse is really interesting because this is God participating in that cyclic destruction of people. Whereas earlier in the Enuma Elish, we have Apsu threatening to kill Inki and Enlil because they're being too loud. What does that sound like?
Yeah, it's funny.
Doesn't it? It sounds like a repeated version with more specificity of what we're about to hear about right now, where God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and here's the thing, I love this part, and that every imagination of thoughts of his heart was only evil. So I know from my childhood being raised Catholic, I grew up thinking God knew my thoughts. Like no way around it. Like you don't get to like Santa Claus, so to speak, knows your thoughts. Like God does too. And so you don't get to get out of childhood without thinking that, you know, God's listening to everything you're thinking. And
Right.
like that's
Yeah.
just the unfortunate like sort of circumstance as like a child going through a religious background and upbringing. You have to deal with that as a child at some point if you're paying attention. That really fucked me up. Like I was like, oh, he's just I can't leave litter because he knows that I just saw that I left litter and I have to pick up the litter. And it was like that's the type of psychology I was left with because he knew my imagination.
All right.
It's a
Interesting.
very it's a very specific word that I want Trevor you to remember. He knew our imagination. And that's maybe different than thoughts. That's maybe different than a specific type of consciousness. It's a specific thing that may only exist in a certain type of mind. And
Yeah.
if we think about where we know imagination comes from, if you recall from the background information, we talk about the possibility that Neanderthals had the ability to imagine. They
Yeah.
can imagine an afterlife. They can imagine symbolic art. They made cave paintings and they made marks on shells and wore them as jewelry. They had imagination. So the origin of imagination, if we were to trace God as having the ability to access imagination, that's still the Neanderthals.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so there's this other thing, and we're going to play another clip here. And there's this other thing that is repeated throughout all of these ancient mythologies, which is that we not only does God know our thoughts, but we hear the voice of God in our thoughts. And that's a repeated narrative that I think we should investigate. Let's talk about Enki and the Epic of Atrahasis. You ready?
Hmm.
Okay, I want to set this up. This is Irving Finkel from the British Museum. So sorry, guys. I'm so sorry. If people don't know Irving Finkel, I strongly recommend you get familiar with this guy. He is amazing. He is everything I hope to grow into as a man of knowledge someday. So he's absolutely a genius, and so I'm just gonna go and play the clip. It's too amazing.
Wall, wall, read wall, read wall. Atrahasis, pay heed to my advice that you may live forever. Destroy your house, build a boat, spurn property, and save life. Well, not many letters begin that way. And in point of fact, I was able to read it at sight because I had a very demanding teacher who used to hit people and thrash them with barbed wire until they learnt their signs. And so recognizing the beginning of the flood story in the Babylonian epic was a doddle for someone who graduated from that classroom. So I realized I had in my hands a piece of the old Babylonian version of the flood story, which is a piece of gold in the world because everyone is interested in the flood story and nobody ever gets their hands on an unpublished piece which has never been seen by any other Assyriologist. So I was rather excited about it, and what happened was he took it away, picked up the lamp and said, "And what about this?" And when I'd gone through the rest of the material, trembling with excitement and thinking, can I borrow this for a while and read it, he went, and I didn't see him for the best part of a decade. So I knew that this thing was in circulation, and this was before the trustees of the British Museum had produced this handbook about how to knock people to the floor and take over their property for the trustees. So I just let him escape. But I knew that sooner or later it would come back to the British Museum because all important things do. Some of them, for example, are temporarily in the Louvre, but sooner or later they will come to us.
Sorry, I had to play that clip. It makes me laugh so hard. It's true. It's true. The British Museum just steals artifacts and doesn't give them back. But I think the important point is this. We have in this mythology something incredibly important and relevant to today's times as it was back then when it was first documented. It's a layered thing, and it starts with the statement "read wall, read wall." It's this notion that everything that was a wall was made of reeds. So he's calling Atrahasis to the wall, and Enki is speaking to Atrahasis through the wall.
Yep.
Metaphorically, we can take for that whatever it will be, but the idea is that
I've
this
always
is,
wondered what the metaphor was there.
yeah, I think the metaphor is that Enki is talking to Atrahasis in his mind.
Oh, nice. I love
This is an example of a barrier between a god and a person, a human, and only the voice is transmitted. And
that's
so
interesting.
that's what I think this is a metaphor of. And I think it's really important that the context of information that's being shared is explicitly stated. This is what we would otherwise categorize in modern UFOlogy as a download experience,
Yeah, I like
in
that.
which a person downloads advanced technological information about how to make a craft that saves civilization. This is the first technology transfer uh, of that magnitude. These are the first stories that we know about is God's giving us technology to save humanity. And that narrative is just echoed throughout time. And we see that ramifications in all of the series that Marty's done and things that he's talked about. And this is, in my opinion, the first example of that experience taking place. More so, I'm sorry, it's so I didn't
No,
sorry, go ahead.
no, keep going, keep going.
More
I was
so,
just gonna, I was just gonna say. So, I mean, it's a sure, it's a stretch, right? There's a lot of different ways to interpret things that seem like allegories. However, it is clearly an allegory. I mean, because there's just, I can't think of a reason why you would tell the story this way because it's just such an irrelevant detail that he's on the other side of a wall talking to him. Like, it's just odd. It's clearly some type of allegory for something. And hey, that's as good
some
as
way for the
expected,
God to interact with human. I mean, like the backstory is that Inky has taken an oath not to tell humans about the disaster, and so the way he gets around the oath is to not
Oh,
tell the human, he
that's
tells the
interesting.
wall. And so it could be him telling the wall when Atros is asleep and it's a dream and he's getting this from a dream. It's not really quite clear, but
But
he's getting around his.
Enki does get in trouble for this, so right in the story.
Yeah, but not really, because I mean, different interpretations of the conclusion is that he starts that conversation saying, if you want to live forever, listen to what I have to tell you. And the end of that story is Atrahasis and his wife being granted immortality because, spoiler, they made a great boat. Like
Right,
their boat was awesome. It
right.
kept animals alive, it kept people alive. Inky and Enlil and all of the gods, they didn't have animals. They didn't have food. They didn't have anything. They had nothing. And then Atrahasis shows up with an ark. And Enlil, like they even talk about in the story, Enlil goes and inspects the ark and he comes out of it and made the decision that after he looked at Atrahasis's boat, he's like, yeah, you can be immortal. Come on, you can be
That's
one of us.
interesting.
And that's the story. But what's really interesting, again, so many layers, is that the object, the clay tablet itself, this thing that the narrative is documented on, this fictional narrative, it actually explains how to make an arc. The story, the original story, it says, here's what you need to do to make an arc. The mythology that got told was valuable because it documented how to make a boat. And so if you told the mythology, you told people how to make a boat.
Yeah,
So
that's
the
pretty cool.
object itself has so much value. The mythology has value. The mythology propagates the story to the future generation. It's just so fascinating. It's
And it
like,
it really does point to some sort of inspiration, because
yeah,
we don't have
prior
other
knowledge.
examples of boat plans, really. I mean, well, I guess you could say, the story of Noah, but I mean, I think everyone assumes this is the same.
Yeah.
It's the story of the same thing. So, um, interesting. Now, just to put like a little weird, this isn't super relevant to your conversation, but I had always heard that the original Sumerian story does not contain the Epic of Atra Hassis. It's the Akkadian version that was discovered uh, wherever we call it, whatever we call Babylon. I don't know where this was discovered, this tablet, but had you heard that?
You
Because
know, I'm gonna do the classic Snake Bro thing and just be like, I fucking don't know. I mean,
because
I know what I
it's it
know. Like,
it's it it's
I wish I knew everything, but I don't. I only know what I know, and
well,
that's
it's
it.
just it's a fascinating idea because I think people do want to know like what uh what story is closer to the original story, but they're so close. It may not really matter because they are so similar. Now, but I will say the one thing about the Epic of Atrahasis that reed wall thing is so cool. I don't know. I do you know if there's anything? There's nothing like that in the Noah story, really. Well, I guess they say God spoke to him,
Yeah,
so they kind of are saying it more directly, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Very cool.
yeah. I mean, I I would put my bet on Atrahasis being much older than anything. I would say if the oldest story is about Inky overthrowing Apsu, and Inky is now a direct part of the origins of Noah's Ark. I would say that Atrahasis' story is predates. But yeah, they are. And again, this is just, I think what happens and why I feel like I can just say these are generational stories. I don't know that I could
Yeah,
say any one person is one specific fossil or it's hard to say the fallen angels are the reason why Neanderthals have chins. It's like it's hard to make those things, but like
sure.
I think the way that like I think what's important about I think that again to talk about Marty and his great series, I think what's important to do is to maybe just say, let's lay out the patterns, let's lay out the facts, let's organize things in similar groupings, and let's look for patterns. And we can just say that these patterns exist in these stories, and we can say that with confidence. But that's maybe
Yeah,
the most we can say.
yeah.
Um, okay, what I would say is, God, they go on. Like I said, they build
Oh,
the
look at
exact
that.
thing in this. Like it works it like there it is. That's what the
Oh my
tablet
God.
shows to make. I mean, if you weren't aware of it, like it actually has like a little hut description
I
of a hut.
wasn't aware of it. Wow, look at that.
Yeah, it's an actual arc that was actually built with actual instructions that were given to people, and they found an original clay tablet that has those instructions. It's not built to scale. This is a small scale version,
I
what
was
they
going to
could
say it's so
afford to
much
make,
smaller than the version in the Bible. Okay, gotcha. That's
but it worked. It worked, and it's based upon what was one of the first sort of like dingy sort of
look at
look at
that.
that
How
thing.
cool.
How cool is that, right? Yeah,
Oh
real
man.
real story. I mean, like history is real. Like our mythologies, the stories that were documented and carried throughout our generations of ancestors, some semblance of those things happened, and I feel like I know that my story is in some ways attacking the old gods and attacking the foundations of religion, but I want it to be one in which we can, as the surviving members of the human race, look back on with confidence and know that, like, yeah, this is our history, and there's reason that we should have an appreciation for these old religions. They documented history well, and we shouldn't look past that. It's really important.
Well,
Okay,
yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's one interpretation of what you're saying. Definitely, I agree that's true, but I don't know if it's necessarily attacking the foundations of these things. I mean, there are there are still questions, what is this?
we're
Where is
attacking.
this inspiration coming from, you know?
We're attacking the foundations of religion. We're definitely attacking the foundations of religion. Don't
Are
let
we?
that. I am.
Okay, how though? Like what? Like I'm not sure. Like okay, hold on. Let me backtrack. There are certainly many religious people who would be very offended by this, but
Yeah.
like just
I
objectively.
know, I know, and I know objectively, but I don't want to sugarcoat what I'm going to present, like in any way.
But
Like,
I mean, but I guess what I'm saying is like, w how do you feel like this is attacking the foundations of religion?
well, I think that's a good point, and I thank you for asking. I think as a Christian, one of the most confusing things about the Old Testament is the evil nature of God,
Mhm.
the
Yeah,
seemingly in like the lack of empathy in the God figure from the Old Testament. It is confusing. I can't tell you the number of times like it's come up in our Telegram chat about like why the Old Testament God is the way it is. And
well, I mean, the first interpretation of that.
which you tell me. I mean, I know what I know,
So,
but
so, so I'll get it wrong, but like the first Christian canon didn't include the Old Testament,
yeah, I believe it.
and the exact reason was the reason you're saying is I forget the guy's name, but he was like an early church father, and he was like it just doesn't seem like the same person, Jesus and Yahweh. They don't seem like the same person. Jesus never uses the word Yahweh.
Yeah.
And so they basically didn't include it for a very short amount of time. in the first Christian canon. It was just, the gospel and, the other books.
It's
So yeah.
I wish I was an expert on all of that. What I would say is that my instinct is that um, Paul took over the church at a very early time period and converted it to something that's we now know to be Roman Catholicism, and that produced modern Christianity that included.
Now you sound like the Mahdi, but I'm not saying you're wrong.
I just think that there's a myth, there's something about that time period that isn't abundantly apparent, and I am not an expert on that, and so I
Yeah.
wouldn't like tread in the wrong water here to go in the wrong direction. I want to go in the direction I want to go back to, which is attacking the foundations of religion and the
Here we go.
notion of a of a divine universal. No, divine universal God, I'm fine with. A local tribal God, I'm not fine with. I,
Sure.
I actually don't know what I'm fine with. I just know this is really interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
so circle back. So the idea is this. Back in the earliest accounts of our mythologies, we think God knows our imagination, knows our thoughts, and can speak directly to our mind. Everything about that is a summation of a concept about the evolution of consciousness. It's called the bicameral mind. Are you familiar with this yet?
Yeah. Yeah. What's the book? Master and His Emissary. Great book all about this. Yeah.
Well, I don't know that, but there's a great TV show called Westworld. Are you
Oh,
familiar with it?
yeah.
Okay. So Westworld as a concept is an amusement park where artificial robots have been given artificial intelligence, and something starts to happen where they begin to exhibit behaviors that weren't programmed into them. One of them being that two robots begin to have the same shared internal monologue experience where they are speaking to somebody named Arnold.
Hmm. Yep.
I'm going to play some clips and we'll go from there. All right, here we go.
Abernathy and Walter were exhibiting other aberrancies beyond memory recall of previous builds. They were hearing voices, talking to someone.
A simple cognitive dissonance. That's all.
I'd agree, except they were talking to the same imaginary person. Someone named Arnold.
Arnold. A host began to pass the Turing test after the first year. But that wasn't enough for Arnold. He wasn't interested in the appearance of intellect, of wit. He wanted the real thing. He wanted to create consciousness. He imagined it as a pyramid. See? Memory, improvisation, self-interest.
And at the top?
Never got that. But he had a notion of what it might be. He based it on a theory of consciousness called the bicameral mind.
The idea that primitive man believed his thoughts to be the voice of the gods. I thought it was debunked.
No, it's a theory for understanding the human mind, perhaps, but not as a blueprint for building an artificial one. You see, Arnold built a version of their cognition in which the hosts heard their programming as an inner monologue, with the hopes that in time their own voice would take over. It was a way to bootstrap consciousness. But Arnold hadn't considered two things. One, that in this place, the last thing you want the hosts to be is conscious, and two, the other group who considered their thoughts to be the voices of the gods.
So I clipped off that too early. And what the other gentleman says is that those people who think their voices to be the voice of God, those are the lunatics. It's important that I mention that because it's a really important part about this whole conversation is about where people that are conscious exist within the spectrum of having communication with God and then being totally locked away within their own ego and within their own life. So Okay, I feel like I want to hear your thoughts from that clip before I start talking again.
Um, I mean, am I interpreting this as like an actual scientific theory or just a TV show or like what? How do you interpret
Yeah, the
that?
bicameral mind, the
Yeah.
idea of the bicameral mind as a
So,
theory
so
for the
just as
evolution of consciousness. The
so the
idea
idea that
that that
one hemisphere hears the voice of God in quotes and one hemisphere acts on it. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know. So that Alfred North Whitehead quote, we think so that our thoughts die instead of us. And it's just this idea that inner monologue thoughts simulate, mental simulations evolved to allow us to play out scenarios in our head so we can decide whether or not we want to engage in them. And, you know,
yep,
a horse will see a rattlesnake and back off knowing it's going to fall off a cliff because it can't run these like mental scenarios where we're walking along a trail, we're thinking like, is a snake going to jump out? If it does, what am I going to do? And well, I'm certainly not going to jump right because there's a cliff over there. And then so if a snake jumps out, you jump, you're just constantly like,
yeah.
and this turned into like this thing. I think that's maybe, well, now I don't know. I'm curious. I mean, it doesn't, it's not, it's interesting. It's not going to get me all the way there.
Mhm.
Like I'm not going to say like, yeah, I guess that's where
Good, yeah,
consciousness
yeah.
came from, but it is interesting. So I want to hear more.
Okay, so my take on it is twofold. Okay, so first take on just what they're doing in that clip is that they're saying that the bicameral mind is a way to bootstrap consciousness, in which there's this idea that a person and their ego, their self, does not yet exist. Their conscious self does not exist. How do you get that functionality into a humanoid brain? You give it the voice of God at first, and the voice of God is telling its basic programming what to do. And then over time, that basic programming takes over, and that person becomes unique and no longer hears the voice of God telling their basic programming what to do. That's Arnold's motivation and theory for how to build consciousness. There was that it's a little Easter egg, but there was that diagram that he showed in that clip. We're going to come back to that diagram later. That's the notion though, is that the bicameral mind explains, and the reason this started in part, the person that came up with this theory is that the notion that these ancient mythologies kept saying that the motivations of the actors in these stories was always by the directive of the gods. And it wasn't until there was the Homer and the Iliad, whichever was first, that on the way back, the hero began to recognize the ego, is if from my understanding. Again, I'm not an expert. I could be butchering that, but from what I read about with the bicameral mind is that that story showed a transition in cognitive thought, where the people at the start of that story were being their motivations were the gods' motivations. And then that somehow got kicked over into consciousness and the ego. And then you have the motivations of the person that wants to go home. So the bicameral mind was a theory developed by this man named Julian James. I don't know. This wasn't that long ago. I think it was back in the 70s. So much that we're going to play a clip from the author, who's an American psychologist who wrote The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. The idea being that consciousness resulted because of the breakdown in this two hemispheric mindset. His primary hypothesis of consciousness state that consciousness is based on and accessed by language, which as language developed, consciousness so did too. And that makes sense because as we think about words and communication, we're also developing a sense of self. Interactions with the non-conscious half of the bicameral mind is based on verbal hallucinations. That's an important idea. That's the reed wall. That's Inky telling Atrahasis how to build a boat through his dreams. Uh, the breakdown of the bicameral mind precedes consciousness and the ego. The double brain of bicamerality is based on two hemispheres of the frontal lobes being organized differently from today's functional organization. You brought up a breakdown in brain lateralization in your last episode, and you don't know it.
Okay, tell me.
So the whole cult associated with effective altruism,
Mm,
there's examples of those people going bad, right? And we kind of talked about, like, I posted links into the Discord.
yeah, yeah.
I don't know the gentleman's name, and he's a transgender individual. He is a transgender guy, and their theory was that it was a breakdown in their bicameral mind. One hemisphere was female and the other was male,
Oh,
and
interesting.
transgenderism was the actual breakdown happening, and the other gender took over that mindset. The problem is when that happened, it directly correlated with really bad, like he killed people, like if I understand correctly.
Ah,
Yeah, like really bad behaviors, like incredibly bad behaviors. It was that I think they categorize it as an info hazard, warning, bicameral mind is an info hazard. Um,
well,
so
I mean, this is interesting. There's aspects of this that there's aspects of, okay, for example, like the functional lateralization of the hemispheres. It's it's not really. The modern interpretation of the bicameral mind is that, if assuming you're right-handed, the right hemisphere is sort of big picture. It's where planning is done for the most part. It's just integrating lots of different variables and sensory information, and then it provides instructions to the left hemisphere to carry out actions. So it's like a modern version of the bicameral mind.
yeah. Yep.
Except I guess we've replaced the voice of God with just you know, our own inner monologue, I guess. But it's
Yeah.
not all language. I think it's wrong to say consciousness is based on language. It's sentience. It doesn't have anything to do with language. But I think definitely like this inner monologue, this quote unquote voice of God, obviously you need a language for the voice to be in. So that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's actually specific areas of the brain associated with decision making because of language,
Yeah.
right? Like as if you're a receiver, as if your brain is a receiver, and you keep on talking about. I'm reading your book. I'm not all the way
Yes.
through. I know you're talking about it, but it's as if the left. We're going to get to it. It's as if there's a portion of the brain that is designed to be a receiver for language, and there's no way around that. Like that's just the way the brain's structured. Um, so do you want to? Okay, he expanded the notion. Okay, here. He also expanded on the impact of consciousness on imagination and memory, and the combination of the two creating the notion of the self. So
Yeah.
God knew our imagination, which is, again, these are the concepts. So you ready to hear from Julian James? This is a bit of a clip, but it's important. Ready?
Yeah. I'm ready.
Okay.
Bicameral mind. The second main hypothesis is that preceding consciousness, there was a different mentality based on verbal hallucinations. For this, I think the evidence is overwhelming. Wherever we look in antiquity, there is some kind of evidence that supports it, either in literary texts or in archaeological artifacts. Apart from this theory, why are there gods? Why religions? Why does all ancient literature seem to be about gods and usually heard from gods? And why do we have verbal hallucinations at all? Before the publication of this book, verbal hallucinations were not paid much attention to, except as the primary indicator of schizophrenia. But since that time, a flurry of studies have shown that the incidence of verbal hallucinations is far more widespread than was thought previously. Roughly 1/3 of normal people hear hallucinated voices at some time. Children hear voices from their imaginary, or we should say hallucinated playmates. It has recently been discovered that congenital quadriplegics who have never in their lives spoken or moved, and are often regarded as vegetables, not only understand language perfectly, but also hear voices they regard as God. The importance I put on these studies taken together is that they clearly indicate to me that there is a genetic basis for such hallucinations in us all, and that it was probably evolved into the human genome back in the late Pleistocene, and then became the basis for the bicameral mind.
Huh. Kind of sounds a lot like what we've just been talking about.
Yeah, it's super interesting. But so is the implication that these genes have left the population or that they're just now manifest as our inner monologue?
I think the implication about the genetics is that it happened at a time period where brain structure changed during the Pleistocene, and that the bicameral mind, the influence of a God experience, probably started back then. Um,
Hmm.
and so I think it's important to make that connection, though, because when we are looking at the fossil remains of the people from the school and Tabun caves, we are looking at bicameral minds, according to this theory. So that's a really, really, really important like connection to make before we go on. Like that's quite literally the author of this theory is saying that, like, yeah, that's what these people who we now think of as Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, that's their brain anatomy. And we inherited that anatomy from them at this time period. Um, Now, you didn't catch that last part, though.
Yeah, what
And
was it?
I'm surprised you didn't catch that part. I
I'm
don't
t
want
I'm
to
getting I'm
really
getting tired, that's why. Tell-
so we're getting to it. This is about to get hot, though. You need to wake up, buddy.
I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready.
So he said that there's a long history of people who are quadriplegic, who have no ability
Hmm.
to speak or communicate. They're hearing the voices of God. We've actually recently heard about a similar group of people communicating with God that have similar cognitive impairments and physical impairments, and that's the telepathy tapes.
Oh, my favorite.
Welcome to the very first episode of the Telepathy Tapes, where we venture into claims of widespread telepathy via a group who is systematically dismissed, non-speakers who often have autism. For decades, parents of non-speakers have been told by doctors, educators, and scientists that their kids are not in there. They are not capable of communication or competent of learning. Imagine being one of those parents and discovering that everybody has been wrong about your child. They are in there, they are competent, and they can communicate. But then also discovering that your child can read your mind.
All right. We don't need to go on. You and I have talked about the telepathy tapes. I generally agree with you. And the way it was presented, I wasn't happy about a variety of things that they chose to do as storytellers. And I think that all of your criticisms are worthwhile and important. Here's what they're dumb enough for not realizing is that the basis for the bicameral mind is stating the exact example they're drawing to. And so the origins of a theory for consciousness reflects accounts that they're talking about. And so there's multiple accounts of these phenomena and experiences happening in people who are cognitively sensory. Let's just say they're impaired by their senses.
Hmm.
They're there. People are there. They just don't have the ability to use their body or hear or utilize their body in ways that we do, and we
Right.
accept information. I want to make one point, and it's not my point, and I want to make certain that Drew LP McQuack from the Discord is credited with this idea. We went through all of this, and it was very powerful and moving. And I will thank this podcast for getting me laid because of all the information I knew at one point in time. And the woman has a child with autism. And anyway, never mind. The point is
Don't
that
use your powers for evil, Carl. Come
never
on.
use never use it. God, I need all the help I can get. So the LP, he made the point that the spelling boards that they use that are so controversial,
Yeah.
they use those as communication aids for people at end of life.
Hmm.
right? So if we're going to utilize this technology for people at the end of life when we're making decisions about their will, how to take care of their finances, their corporation, whatever it may be, and we're denying that to these people, that's wrong. That's incredibly wrong, right? Like there's a reality here that doesn't involve telepathy where there are people who are trapped in their bodies. And this podcast made that evident, I hope, to everyone. And it's
Yeah.
shown us that there's a way for them to communicate, and that way should be supported, enhanced, and improved upon so that those people have quality life. And if they are hearing the voices of God, so many people want to know what they're hearing. You know what I mean? Like they have valuable input that people want to know. So
Oh,
we
wait,
should,
is somebody denying the board? What do you mean by that?
yeah, yeah, that's a whole thing in the telepathy
In the
tapes.
tapes. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And so like that's the point I want to make about that podcast. The notion that of here's the important point, and here's where it gets weird. I don't know if you're ready for it to get weird yet, though.
I'm ready. I'm ready. I just want to say before you get weird, I have been unfairly maligned for my commentary about the telepathy tapes for too long. All I said was just Kai, was very misleading in the audio only version
No,
of the
there's so
two
many.
episodes that I listened to. Maybe I'm sure everyone says it gets much she's perfect the rest. I'm sure she is. And I'm obviously very sympathetic to everyone involved in this. I have gotten more hate for criticizing Kai Dickens than I could possibly ever imagine. But anyway, okay, let's get weird. Let's do it.
All right. I think that we've captured a moment of synchronicity that
Oh, is this what you've been talking to me about?
this is it. This is what's been
Okay,
so hard to figure out.
finally, finally.
All right. So this got published December 24th to 2024, right? Last
Okay.
year. We've been doing this for a long time. I've been writing this narrative for a really long time, right? Like if you recall back when we started, I sent you a bunch of clips, some of them being from Dr. Emily Casanova
Oh
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
her connections between autism and Neanderthals. And she makes the point uh, that we not only did we inherit genes for cognition from Neanderthals, we inherited creativity. We had this explosion in culture and technology and innovation from that hybridization. That speciation happens from hybridization. That whole conversation was directed not towards autism, but towards hybridization. But it was actually a conversation about autism and the genes for autism being found in Neanderthals. So when we inherited genes for cognition from Neanderthals, we actually inherited genes for autism. Now, she makes the point that in Neanderthals, those genes may not have caused autism. They were probably functional. They're in us now, and they're on the wrong backbone. And when they're in us, especially when they're in specific groupings, we have a higher prevalence of autism. So before I go on, I don't want to like speak beyond you're a scientist, you're a neuroscientist, so you know about things. So I don't want to like if you have input, please interrupt me at any point.
No, no, please keep going.
Okay, so it's not a stretch then for me, who's based an entire series on a whole lot of conjecture and stacking assumptions on top of each other, um, for me to connect the dots to say that if autism is inherited from Neanderthals, if cognition is inherited from Neanderthals, and we now believe that autism shows a higher prevalence of telepathy, were Neanderthals telepathic?
Dun dun dun. Yeah, maybe. Why not?
It's like at this point in time, you're like, I'm so worn out. Like I've been
No, no,
through
no.
it.
I don't mean
Roller
that.
coaster
I don't mean
for it.
that. It's listen, if we're just having fun speculating, yeah, maybe they could be. A couple questions.
Yeah.
So what do you mean that we inherited cognition from Neanderthals?
Well, we know we inherited culture from them because we duplicated it and improved upon it. We know we inherited artwork from it because we
Okay,
duplicated it and
okay.
improved
I get what
upon
you're
it.
saying. Okay.
We we have brain structure analogous to them, but when we met together, we went through this hybridization, ultramodern growth of our brain that for a brief period of time before those people went extinct may have been incredibly intelligent. And so that lineage and that remnant sort of experience propagated throughout Europe, and we inherited cognition from them.
Well, I love the idea of a genetic basis for telepathy. That's very cool because it's, theoretically testable, right? Um, has that been done?
You already talked about it, motherfucker.
I did.
So we're gonna get to it, man. Like we're gonna get to it. Like you're fucking telepathic. It's weird.
I might be. I'm
So
part Neanderthal.
so here's a clip I recorded.
I know it sounds crazy,
Oh, that's
but
right.
let's just say there's a colony of Neanderthals that had autism, that could read minds, that could communicate through telepathy to people. How that interaction with early Homo sapiens who did not have that experience, who were Adam and Eve, who were separate entities, couldn't read minds like we are today, how that experience sort of created the mythology of the all-knowing God. What do you think?
Is this
So
a te
this is me recording that idea live to my Telegram friends,
Oh,
sharing
gotcha.
I shared with you. This is days before you and I record our podcast, which I've just shown here, January 10th, a couple of weeks after
Yep.
telepathy tapes are released. What the fuck do you do immediately after we record our video?
Let's hear it.
Telepathy tape.
Telepathy tapes.
I'm not laughing. I've
So
been
when
working
did
on this story for over a year, man. Like you fucking pre-debunked my conclusion before I get to it. That's not funny, man. Like I've been working on, like I've
I'm
been
on to you?
struggling with how to resolve this fact because you literally circumvented me in my imaginative experience to create this story. Literally writing a story, you circumvented my conclusion through telepathy.
I was just laying in bed going, that fucker Carl's gonna try to say Adam and Eve are telepathic. And then I got up and I recorded.
So like that's
It's
funny,
pretty
right?
interesting. It's
Like,
pretty interesting.
that's
Yeah.
funny. That's really funny. Like
And to add,
it's funny in a way that like I am in pain. Like there could be a God laughing at me, the type of humor this is. Like this is that type of layered, right? Like somebody's laughing at me
if
and
your
it's not
picture
me.
frame falls down behind you while you're talking, I'm gonna start laughing.
I have a story about falling pictures. It's mad. Never mind. It's different. So So you do this. It's maddening to me. Like it's driving me crazy. You do this at the start of the episode, and I'm listening to the episode, and it's like you're
Wait, do what though? Do
unfolding.
what though? What do you mean? What do you mean? They're gonna play it, okay. Look at all these. Okay,
This
let's
is
do.
this is a tragedy. It's not funny. This is like you ruining my story. This
All right,
is
let's hear
really
it.
what I'm going through. Like you're debunking telepathy by reading my mind.
I'm
I'm not joking. This is really
so
what I'm going through. And
I'm unbunking telepathy then. It's perfect.
unbunking because to quote Russ, debunking is not correctly phrased. Bunking would be refuting something. Debunking is agreeing with something.
Oh, so
So
I debunked you then.
you would debunk me. You debunk me. All right, so here we go. Now, I wish Alfredo was here because we're going to be drawing from some things that he said initially, and it's this idea that there is a firewall in our brain,
What
and
episode are you about to play? What is this?
this is the telepathy tapes.
Okay. Before I move on, what are your thoughts on that?
It's nothing new. We've been trying to study telepathy for a long time, especially our government. And they're like really into it right now because, again, we're the product, right? So if they can get in our minds, they can sell us whatever the hell they want, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so that's ultimately, it's all driven by money. I don't think it's possible.
Telepathy not possible at all for anybody.
No. That to be honest, I don't think it's possible because that's the last of the frontier. Like that's your last barrier
Yeah.
of consciousness,
Right.
and that's like it has firewalls.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that gets into this free will discussion where it's like
Right.
there's the smallest but most stable, most permanent of human freedoms is the choice that you get to make inside your mind, right? So
Yes.
if someone is able to communicate with you inside your mind, or manipulate you inside your mind, that is, that's it. That's obviously no bueno. I think I was able to modulate the volume on my end, so I think it was okay. But I think I may have awoken some religious trauma in you with that clip there, because you're thinking about how unfree you were as a child.
Geez, Merry Christmas. I think that what I would say is that you actually are a really good podcast host. You do a
Oh,
really good job of coming up with really intelligent and insightful things to say. That was one example of many. You and Alfredo both are great at this, but you're wrong.
That's fine. I'm okay with that.
So
Before I move on,
let's talk about why you're wrong, respectfully.
yeah, please.
Yeah, and Alfredo.
Oh, the
And
god,
you,
the
you,
god
allu- you,
helmet.
you alluded to this, but the firewall has been breached. It's
Well,
been
yeah, firewalls can be breached. It doesn't mean they don't exist.
the firewall exists and it's been breached. Let's hear about it.
Here at Laurentian University in Sudbury, Ontario, a team is investigating certain common perceptions of the inner mind.
So we'll be taking a baseline recording first. Before we
Right now, they're looking at the electromagnetic brain patterns seen in people having the near-death experience.
going to compare that.
The research is led by Dr. Michael Persinger.
Basically, at any given time, all experience is due to those portions of the brain that are most metabolically active. If we can simulate that by applying complex, meaningful magnetic fields to the brain, we can also induce those experiences.
This experiment is testing the idea that mystical perceptions and paranormal experiences can be turned on at will, not by hypnosis or shamanic drumming, but by a scientist, stimulating nerve activity in the brain.
All right. Before we go on, did you catch the mechanism for stimulation?
No.
Electromagnetism.
Yeah, I was gonna say it must be like transcranial magnetism, right?
You got it.
What we've been doing recently is generating words as magnetic patterns. And even though the person isn't hearing it through their ears, their brain is interpreting it. So they're actually having fragments of experiences as if they're hearing it, when in actual fact they cannot be.
These experiences are so strong, they're utterly real for the person who has them. They can be as profound as a religious conversion, yet we can generate them with a machine. These mind games are beginning to shed their secrets. The scientist becomes the shaman.
Okay. What do you think so far?
Very cool.
Right. So the idea is that inside of our brains, we have a mechanism capable of receiving a signal in which we respond by understanding a paranormal experience is taking place. Whether or not that experience exists around us, it may, but we have the mechanism by which we localize inside of our internal firewall protected, seemingly consciousness, the potential for a paranormal experience to manifest.
Well, hold on. So in this case, they're causing the person to perceive words, right?
Yeah, they're communicating words to a person remotely without words being heard in the room.
Help me understand how that's piercing a firewall of consciousness.
Your thoughts are not your own. The things that you hear are something else.
Those two different
They're
things.
submitted to you by some external influence. They've breached the firewall.
I actually think that. I agree with you actually 100%. But before we go there, are they perceiving these as their thoughts, or are they perceiving these as words they're hearing?
They think it's the voice of God. They're perceiving these as paranormal experiences. They think that they're either interacting with God,
these research
angel,
participants,
a serpent, a monster, a demon. Like they don't know what it is. It depends on their predilection and what they're geared towards, it could be an alien. They could go through an abduction
But
experience
but
similar
so
to.
but these research participants don't think that, right? They're
No,
just
they're having near-death experiences. They're triggering near-death experiences in these people.
what does that mean? Tell me
Dude,
more.
it's so unethical. This is MK Ultra, like
Oh,
taken to the end. Like this is them like achieving mind control, achieving.
so these are actors in
No,
this
these are
clip.
real people. This is a real news clip talking to Dr. Michael Persinger about his research. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
It is crazy.
He went nuts at the end. He open sourced everything. He's just like everybody gets to know everyone's thoughts. That's his attitude at the end of this. Now, this is not new. The firewall has been breached before Dr. Persinger. It was breached by a man people familiar with Marty's series know, who is on.
I can't quite bring myself to say the firewall's been breached because it doesn't sound like they're interpreting this as their thoughts.
Yeah, so I don't think you maybe catch what they said. They're interpreting the experience as a paranormal event.
Right, right. So in
Like
my mind, they're still perceiving
God
it as
appeared to them.
something outside of them.
God appearing inside their mind, God giving them voices, God telling them what to do, God
Yeah.
reaching the firewall, God Inky telling you how to build a boat. That's what they're simulating.
So I thought the implication
Reaching the
was that
firewall.
they were making these people think that they were thinking these things. No, they're convincing them that it's like a spiritual experience.
Yeah, they're faking
Okay.
a UFO abduction. They're depending on who gets into that chair, who puts on that helmet, it might be a UFO abduction, or they might be speaking to the Archangel Michael.
Gotcha. Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's stimulating that paranormal. They could just have nothing except this vague sense that they're being looked at.
Gotcha.
That's
Okay.
the sensation that they're stimulating. Now, this technology, we were told about this technology through the greatest movie of all time, acted by the greatest movie actor of our generation, Val Kilmer. And
Oh yeah.
this is a scene from Real Genius.
See, it was the braces that gave me the idea. They're a perfect antenna, and his whole head becomes a speaker.
It's about time someone put it to good use.
All right. We don't need to play that entire clip. It goes on. Kent hears the voice of God. He tells them information, and it's the trick that these kids play on each other. That's real technology that was developed by Andrei Puharich, the parapsychologist who investigated, remote healing in Mexico and the use of psilocybin for mind control. He developed and patented a radio receiver that could be inserted into a fake tooth so that audio signals were not auditory, could not be heard, were transmitted into the bone of the jaw and then put into the ear. And
that's
effectively
cool.
what you just saw from Real Genius. All right. We got to continue going down this rabbit hole.
Keep going. Keep going.
It's a little bit long. I'm going to step out because I've really got to take a break here. But we're going to play Dr. Michael Persinger. I would encourage you to boost the audio as much as possible for this clip.
Okay.
It's really important and speaks to everything that we're talking to. And we're going to, if not in this immediate conversation, this will be important at later times, but we got to go through it.
I'm ready.
By applying the appropriate rotational magnetic fields that affect consciousness, and we now realize that consciousness is not continuous, that's an illusion. It's recreated every 20 to 25 milliseconds, roughly 40 to 50 hertz. And if you can slow that down, put the time between the end of one quanta of consciousness, if you wish, and the beginning of the next one, if you open that up, you seem to have access to all kinds of information that you typically do not have. We've shown that that's probably what some of the special people have, such as Ingo Swann and Sean Hierovance. When they came here, we measured their brains very carefully. And it appears to be very much like any kind of person who is sensitive to the environment. They just process information differently. So if you begin to change the organization of the brain, you change the sensor, because the brain itself can be seen as a whole sensor, as a sensor itself. So you can do this with shamanistic practices, as my colleague Don Hale has been pursuing for many years. You can do it with drugs. You can do it by certain kind of rituals of deprivation, hypoxia, starvation, sensory isolation, and sit in a cave like Muhammad did, or you can wander through the desert like Christ did. It produces the same basic effect. You alter brain activity, and now you have access to information that you typically would not have access to. Now, which hemisphere is doing that? Well, our experimental work indicated it's the right hemisphere, the one that's not associated with the sense of self. And that's probably one of the reasons that so much of the shamanist experiences are attributed to a sentient being. That when you stimulate the right hemisphere, you actually become aware of effectively what is your left hemispheric sense of self. And it's you, it's your brain, but you don't perceive it as such. It's perceived as a sentient being, somehow familiar but somehow different. And every shaman in every culture has a familiar, a totem, a spirit guide, something equivalent, that basically, to whom they attribute their capacities and their powers. That is a right hemispheric process. And the right hemisphere is highly specialized in the human brain for spatial orientation, for affect, for perceiving, and perhaps for dreaming. The dreaming is definitely a more right hemispheric process. And so that information that can be accessed, and that's what it is, accessed, during dreaming states now becomes more powerful and more easily obtained during shaman states. And it's a right hemispheric process. And we have shown that very clearly. Stimulate the right hemisphere. People have information that typically should not have within the realms of their education and culture. And they have the sense presence to whom they attribute. The same way the Greeks used to call it the muses, used to visit.
And you're doing that through what process?
Well, we apply very, very weak magnetic fields over the right hemisphere. Okay. And we have found that it is the right hemisphere. We know what patterns there are. And these patterns that generate this effectively are those which are associated with tribal rituals, specifically singing with a crescendo every 4 to 5 seconds. It's associated with patterns that are generated within the earth itself around these sacred sites. So the question is, where is the information coming from? And that's where we are now. Could the information be stored in the environment in the traditional Akashic record concept, which is shown in many cultures, disbelieved by most, but science really hasn't grappled with it yet. Although Pre-Brum certainly hinted at it when you argue about the holographic brain and the holographic universe. Suffice it to say, without getting into calculations, the Earth's magnetic field has the energy to basically store the information that has been generated, well, I should say to store the energy in terms of joules, that's been generated by every human being since the beginning of human beings. It has the capacity to store that. Whether it does it or not is a different story. But the next stage will be to try to find the equivalent, or the physical equivalents of what these old concepts are.
Well, that was pretty interesting.
That.
How far through my book are you?
I'm.
I don't mean to put you on the spot. You can say chapter 1 if you want.
Oh God, no! I'm like at. I think no, I got through 10.
It's funny just hearing him.
Holographic universe.
I was literally just going to say, because he brought up the holographic universe right there. I was going to say, I wonder if you're going to think that chapter is interesting. And that's the chapter you're about to read. Yet another telepathic moment. Wow.
So here's some interesting fun facts for people. I just learned this 2 days ago. You know how our universe is sort of finely tuned for life? Like it's crazy. Like it should happen. Like somebody played with that simulation a couple of times and
wait till you get to chapter 11. Yeah, okay. Keep going.
So do you know what the composition of the atoms in our atmosphere is?
What do you mean? Like the percent of different gases?
Yeah, you wouldn't know.
20% oxygen.
It's precisely tuned
yeah.
to replicate silica transistors and computer components. So if you were to take all of the atoms in the atmosphere, it'd basically make a computer.
It's fucking nuts.
Yeah. I heard this scientist say that like this fun idea might be that somebody came along and figured out how to make a computer out of atmosphere. That's a neat idea.
Yeah, I like
that. Would be a way to store people's thoughts remotely. And so the idea is really interesting. Here's what I'll go
There you
back
go.
to, which is that it's possible, and this is conjecture, but it's possible. And granted, this is conjecture coming from the mind that invented the God helmet, the mind that invented the way that we could stimulate our brains to experience God. He is the one suggesting the principles for the Akashic record. So I just want to file away the idea that the Akashic record could be accessed shamanically through geologic structures in the earth that enhance cognitive experience in which we have a closer connection to that information spectrum.
Here we go.
That's in the deck right now. All right, so that's a bit of a detour. We need to get back to the telepathy tapes. And
I have about 20 minutes worth of storage left, or our thing is just going to end. So I'm just giving you a 20-minute warning.
All right, then we're on the 20-minute warning. So the second.
Okay, our findings in healthy participants with this.
All right, we're not gonna do that.
I hate listening to myself. Why are you doing this to me?
Frontal lobe inhibition.
Yeah.
We brought that up in the Shout of Turin episode. Frontal lobe inhibition increases psi abilities. I went through your paper because this is what I do, is I check references.
Not my paper, but yes.
Yes, the paper you mentioned in that paper. Transcranial stimulation. They are accessing the left medial frontal lobe. Where is that? The medial frontal gyrus is right here. The left medial version is on this side. That version of our brain is associated with language recognition. It is called the Broca's area. The fossa of the third frontal convolution refers to Broca's area, a region located in the left frontal lobe at the base of the third frontal convolution.
So just to mention that it's not associated with speech recognition; it's associated with speech production.
Speech production.
Yes.
And making decisions about abstract concepts, taking words and turning them into an actualized sense of reality. That's what this does. It is a receiver of text to turn into an actual thing.
Yeah.
Let's go back to.
And generally, we think it is receiving words from Wernicke's area, but maybe not.
I don't know that. That's interesting. I'm not familiar with that.
It's the exact same region, but on the right side.
Oh,
which is actually to your point, is actually kind of interesting, because this idea that, now I know the bicameral mind isn't really an anatomical idea, but in the modern version of the bicameral mind, it is. And so the right, the mirror image of Broca's area is Wernicke's area. And that is where like you think of the words you're going to say. Mm-hmm. And it's transmitted to Broca's area, and Broca's area produces them. So to your point, this idea of kind of like hearing a voice and then speaking it is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's very interesting. So if we were to, and this is one of those things, you just can't make this stuff up. So the idea of frontal lobe inhibition, if I want to rephrase this idea is a little bit differently, which is that we as evolved people have evolved frontal lobes. So inhibition of a frontal lobe is a retro form of evolution. And so when we look at our bicameral minds and our Neanderthal school brothers, what we see is in the left frontal lobe, they have noted that it is very extensive. And that this region is extensive in Neanderthals and the people from school cave. So the exact region that's associated with receiving that message is the structures of the brain is very extensive. How else to say that? What else that means? I don't know. But everything that we're talking about means that these people may have had enhanced psi abilities. This goes on to suggest that the frontal lobe of these people was smaller than normal. And I would suggest that this might be the reason why people participated in head binding, which was to compress the frontal lobe, and in doing so, create shamanic people. Okay, this is where it's beyond stupid at this point in time. But we're wrapping this up. We're wrapping this up, and I'm going to do this as fast as possible. We're going to talk about Sortes Biblica.
Okay.
Sortes Biblica is the practice of opening the Bible to any random page and
nice.
You fucker.
man, just the right amount.
So,
but you touched to something very important about the Bible. You know what I do sometimes whenever I have questions, and I invite everyone to do it, is like whenever you have a question and you have the book at hand, physically, just open that book, ask the question, and open that book.
So before we go on, you have no idea what my script is. You've never seen my script. You have no idea what I've written. Your concept of what I'm trying to do here is just nothing, right?
I'm experiencing in it just like the listener. Yeah.
Okay.
And then read the first thing, and the first thing you read,
I like
and
it.
how that applies to you. Someone told me about this exercise.
Yeah, Anonymous Al told me about this exercise.
Dude, it's kind of cool. It's like, oh, it's like the little Chinese.
Can I share
cookie.
you? Can I share
you
a
Chinese cookie?
Can I share you a very personal story about that?
Sure, if you're willing to share.
So Alex told me about that. I was having a particularly like dark night of the soul. Just like, what does it all mean? Why are we here? Why does it go by so fast? Like, what's the point? Blah blah. All of the deep questions, And
Nice.
so Anonymous Al had just told me about that. I wish I remembered the actual passage, but I open it up at random and it's Job. And it's when Job is just like grilling God, like, why? And God says, like, who are you to ask me this question? Like, were you there when I laid the cornerstones of the universe? And it's like, damn, that's a pretty good coincidence. Like, if that's a coincidence, that's a good. Yeah.
Oh man.
It was basically like, who are you to ask me these questions? Like, you weren't there when I built this place. Like, just trust that it's gonna be fine. It's gonna work out.
And
have
here we
faith.
are.
Boom.
And here we are talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, here we are talking about it. Do you know what the next line of that is, by the way? Do you familiar with Job 38 since you?
Yeah, I actually went back and read it the other day, but I don't know what's next.
So I want to refresh about all of the things I've talked about, which is that the origin of these mythologies stretch back to a time period when we interact with Neanderthals. That was 100,000 years ago. We know from our what we talked about with the constellation of the Pleiades and the disappearing seven sisters, that our mythologies were first cast up into the constellations 100,000 years ago. We have a continuity between people migrating out of Africa through the Levant, interacting with Neanderthals, taking that mythology with them as they proceed on. The constellations were named when we interacted with Neanderthals. Job wasn't present when God laid the cornerstones of the universe, but do you know who was?
No. Satan.
The morning stars. No.
Okay.
Don't put your twisted Christian mythology on this. When the morning stars sang together, when the morning stars rose above the horizon, do you know who was there? The sons of God were there, and they shouted with joy. Neanderthals were present when the constellations were first named by God and put up into the stars.
Okay.
And the quote that you chose in your debunking of my conclusion from the Bible brings all of that full circle some magical way I can't explain through the Bible. You've brought my narrative to completion. And I am left with only one thing. Well, I can say this is, I wrote this about that whole passage. It's not really important. I was so confounded by this whole situation. I was really only left with two things that I want to share with you right now. And it's a quote from Robert Anton Wilson, who you've played before in previous episodes, and then a quote from my favorite all-time movie. And this is the only way I can summarize how I feel.
Okay, let's hear it.
In around 1973, I became convinced for a while that I was receiving messages from outer space. But then a psychic reader told me I was actually channeling an ancient Chinese philosopher, and another psychic reader told me I was channeling a medieval Irish bard. And at that time, I started reading neurology, and I decided it was just my right brain talking to my left brain. And then I went to Ireland, and I found out it was actually a 6-foot-tall white rabbit. They call it the puka, and the Irish know all about it. So it depends on who I'm talking to, which of these metaphors I use to explain where these weird patterns come from that jump out of the books and take hold of the readers and change their lives. It's not me, it's a 6-foot-tall white rabbit from County Kerry. Or it's the right hemisphere of everybody's brain.
Mm-hmm.
We're only different in the left hemisphere. In the right hemisphere, we all share in the same morphogenetic field.
The collective unconscious.
And the collective unconscious.
That's one side of how I feel. Here's the other side.
P-O-O-K-A. Puka. From old Celtic mythology. A fairy spirit in animal form, always very large. The puka appears here and there, now and then, to this one and that one. A benign but mischievous creature, very fond of rum pots, crack pots, and how are you, Mr. Wilson? How are you, Mr. Wilson? Who in the encyclopedia wants to know?
Prison?
Dr. Chumley, the screwiest thing.
I know, and believe me, heads will roll.
But Dr. Chumley, I was looking.
That's literally how I feel. I feel like some spirit knew my imagination, ran over to you, told you my imagination, and your natural response was to skirp it. And you're just like, I'm skirping that idea.
Yeah, maybe you're right, man. Maybe you're right. Maybe somebody is trying to tell you something. I didn't skirp it. Yeah. Did I skirp it? I'm sorry.
It's fine. It wasn't like you're not necessarily skirping telepathy, but the telepathy tapes. That's fine. I agree with you.
Man, it's funny. The first clip sure sounds a lot like a lot of modern theoretical physics right now. I mean, everyone's really getting into the quantum fields and the collective unconscious, and it's weird. It's weird how modern science is kind of having a way of becoming quasi-spiritual. Oh, look at Bodhi, like the Bodhi leaf and Duke.
Yeah. So listen, I know we got to wrap because you're about to run out of accordion, and there's something that I want to do that's really important to me. I want to thank a bunch of people whose ideas these kind of come from. Emily Casanova, like I mentioned, Irving Finkel, Dr. Pasulka, Dr. Richard Green, Chris Springer, who I will criticize but also respect immensely, Dr. Lee Berger. The Demystify Science podcast is great. And then all of the artists and authors from the Stone Age of Mount Carmel. That publication is amazing. But most importantly, I want to take a moment to remember my dog, Bodhi. I wrote a lot of this when he was undergoing hospice. I was taking care of him, and all of these things were, so every time I think about this stuff, I think about Bodhi. He was a great dog, and I miss him a lot. And then Marduk is my new boy, and you guys heard about my hybrid dog. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. But thank you, Trevor. I wanted to thank you so much for letting me get through this. This has been really important for me to exercise this mental demon.
Oh no, man, this was awesome. And I'm not letting you go quite yet. I have a couple more questions. So what kind of dog was Bodhi?
Bodhi is a Shiba Inu. He was a Japanese mountain dog. They're the most ancient dog breed that is still around. They're one of those primal dogs that didn't really like genetically diverge. They were locked away in Japan and didn't really have exposure to anything else, so they stayed the same way. So they have characteristics that are not at all canine-like.
Certain dogs look smart. Was he a smart dog? He looks like a smart dog.
Yeah, he's like, there's certain things about his brain that only work a certain way. You know what I mean? Like, he's a very smart dog.
No offense to Duke, he doesn't look like he's operating at the same level of intelligence.
Duke is too smart. He is
really,
dude. He opens doors.
I prejudiced him just because he's like a golden retriever.
Duke is ridiculously strong. He is a hybrid, like explain ultra modern like strength in a dog.
Oh my gosh.
He looks like a pit bull. His muscles are so defined. Like he will open doors. I don't know. He just
Oh,
really
strong.
knows to like push anything out of his way. He's a
I
lot. It's a
I had a
lot.
German Shepherd. Is borderline human intelligence, and this dog was incredible. And then when he passed away, we got a chocolate lab. And the drop off in intellect between these two dogs is just it's been really
Now,
hard to get used to.
did I not tell you that I'm training Duke to be a diabetes alert dog?
Oh, no way. Very
Yeah,
cool.
he's
He's
amazing. Like
smart. So he's a smart dog.
he knows the
I'm
scent
sorry,
for
Duke.
blood sugar. Like we play games where he has to find it. The game we're playing right now is that he has to find the scent on me, and I'm hiding it in places where that odor for low blood sugar will be expressed. So I'm
Mm.
teaching him to look on me in specific locations where he will eventually find that scent. So it's a trained game behavior that he's so smart.
I take it back, Duke. You're a genius. I feel bad for besmirching your character. And the very first coffee roaster importer I used was called Bodhi Leaf.
How was it?
Oh, it was the
Nice.
best. It was the best.
The Bodhi leaf is the leaf from the tree that the Bodhisattva gained enlightenment from.
There you go. Yeah. If anyone's in Southern California, I highly recommend Bodhi Leaf. Man, that was interesting. You've given me, and I'm sure our listeners a lot to think about. Nothing that really bothers me. Like I think everything you said jives with how I understand the world. I don't have like a lot of conviction about certain allegories in the Old Testament, so none of that really bothers me. Um, and the God helmet thing is fascinating, man. I need to learn more about it. We've been talking about doing transcranial magnetic stimulation at work. I know nothing about it. I do. I'm a little skeptical of just like this general, like apply a weak magnetic field to the right hemisphere and you induce spiritual hallucinations. But I bet, like you said, if all his work is more or less open source, I'm sure there's more technical details out there that I could read up on. So you've given me a lot of homework because now I'm curious. But
Yeah, great.
I don't I can't explain the telepathy that we've been sharing, but I won't ask too many questions.
Well, listen, there is a follow-up to this, which is something that I was going to get into, but there's a pattern that is traceable amongst people involved with rocket science. Let's just say that there's a pattern of these people receiving similar types of communications that we talked
Yeah.
about in Atrahasis, and these people are leveraging those communications for the advancement of rocket science. And that's a real thing that's happening. Like it's crazy to think about, but like it's not just one person. It's not just one person making up a story about somebody we don't know. These are real people whose memoirs and journals we know about, and
Yeah.
these are the things that they talk about. So this is the history of humanity. So talking about downloads and where that information comes from, that's kind of what is. I don't know when I'm going to get to it, but it's in the works.
That sounds interesting. And I am very excited that I think I've almost talked you into writing a book. So I'll keep
Yeah.
applying. I'll keep applying the pressure via direct message once a month for you to get some thoughts on paper. You're not like me. I get the sense you like to really fully explore the topic before you start writing, which is probably the smarter way to do it. But I'll keep
If I got 2 seconds, man, I just want to say
Yeah.
that like your book is great. You
Oh,
are a
thanks,
great
man.
author. It's really well written. It's very well researched. It's accurate, and I encourage everybody to listen. There's a lot of great stuff in it, but if I'm not all the way through, but I'm enjoying it, and that says a lot. So I highly recommend it.
Thank you, man. I'm glad I got you saying that now because I'm not sure you're going to like the second half.
You already know what I think. You already know it. So
But with that said, good. I'm glad. That means a lot to me, man. I really appreciate it. I've gotten some good feedback. I've gotten some bad feedback, but not really about the writing, just about my conclusions, which is fine. As long as someone doesn't tell me I'm a bad writer, I'm okay. But anyway, man, much appreciated. I can't wait to read yours. Thank you for sharing this. And I really think the last half of this is the most fun conversationally. So I hope we can do it again with Alfredo, and he'll probably be more willing to argue than me, because I actually think I agree with pretty much everything you said. Maybe
Well, I'm glad.
maybe not the spiritual implications, but the actual evidence you're presenting. I don't see that. I'm like, no, I don't think that's true. So it was very interesting. Thank you.
Well, man, I'm glad. It's nice to hear that a plan, a well-laid plan got to its final destination on time and convincingly. So that means a lot to me, and I know Bodhi would enjoy hearing that.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, dear listeners, thank you for listening. Carl, thanks for coming. We'll talk soon.